Okay, team, let's see if we can get started. We had a lot done yesterday and a lot to go before we finish tonight. When we last left, we were last here, we were about to go on to NDP 19. 18, sorry, I read the number wrong. Mr. Scott, would you like to move that and then tell us a little bit about it, why you love it so much?
Yes.
Or if you have another way to get around where we currently are, because I know where we are is in a weird spot. But
you know what, I would, before moving it, seek the guidance of maybe the legislative clerk. This actually relates to the later section 124, which won't. This makes no sense until you deal with it in section 124.
Right.
It could be stood. I'm just trying to. Just give me a moment.
Yeah. So that.
Yeah, NDP 26. That it relates to NDP 26. And I'm not, if I'm allowed to move it, I will, but I just want to make sure that I'm allowed to move it, and it shouldn't be.
Well, you are. At this moment, it's perfectly fine, but I think we had a conversation last night about what the government's thought was on the poll supervisors and where they were going. I was hoping we could get by a bunch of these by doing something different.
Yep. So the bottom line is that NDP 26 and this together would be proposing to continue with what we started proposing by way of getting parties out of the appointment system for Election Day. And it would be to ensure that the returning officer appoints central poll supervisors on the basis of merit following a process fair and transparent, the same test that we used for the deputy returning officers. So the fact of the matter is that we've already voted against the deputy returning officers. Right. Is that correct?
In one spot, but apparently there's other spots in here where we're going to have to vote again. So.
Right. Okay. And so maybe what I would suggest is to wait till we get to the point of the clauses that the government understands are the two that have to be deleted to achieve their purposes, and see where this fits at that time. And NDP 18 should wait until NDP 26.
Do you understand where we're at, Mr. Lukiski? What we're trying to do here is not debate 5 things that are going to be negated by, or possibly negated.
Or debate them at the same time.
Yes, I do understand. I got a little feedback here in my, anyway. No, Craig and I had a brief conversation. I understand that. So, you know, I'm not purporting that we do anything except trying to move through as efficiently as possible. So if we can find to gain some efficiencies here, so that we don't have to, frankly, waste our time and our breath talking about something that's going to be relatively irrelevant based on some of the proposals and that the government's bringing forward, I'm all for it. Now, I would beg askance of the chair and his officials to try and guide us through that. But if we can make it as efficient as possible so we can spend time on other clauses coming forward rather than wasting time on this, I think it would be best served.
Any comment from you, Mr. Sims? Any comment, or you're okay?
Nope, I'm good. I'm good.
All right. Anybody give the chair some guidance on what to do first here?
So what I would suggest is, can this be stood until NDP 26, and then we go to NDP 19, we just vote through them and get to the point where we're
back to poll supervisors?
Back to central poll supervisors.
I need unanimous consent to stand that for that period of time. So
government's good on that.
Great. Okay, so we're going to set that one aside for a minute and go to NDP 19. Please move and describe, please.
There's NDP 26. I'm going to pull this out. Put it there. NDP 19. Okay. So this one, I will move this, just so that we're consistent with what we've been moving. I do recognize that we voted against, the PROC as a whole voted against getting parties out of the business of appointing deputy returning officers. This is dealing with poll clerks, and the section in question would be replaced with words that basically give to Elections Canada through the returning officer the power to appoint poll clerks on the basis of merit following a process that's fair and transparent. I do think this is absolutely ideal in terms of a system that would have Elections Canada doing the appointing in the way that this suggests. We will still move and vote for this. At the same time, I'm going to say right now that I realize that it would potentially create an imbalance because we've already voted down the deputy returning officers in that sense. So I'll leave it at that, and it should be voted on, but as part of a package.
Okay. Also, NDP 19, which was just discussed, Liberal 10 and PV 21 are identical, all saying the same thing here. So each of you will know that those would be included. One vote for the three. NDP 19, Lib 10, and PV 21. Further comment on what Mr. Scott has said? I've already forgot his name. It's incredible. Mr. Sims, did you want to speak?
Yeah, I do believe in lumping these together to the best extent
Okay.
that we can because it does create that imbalance as was pointed out.
Right. Okay. So all in favor of recorded vote on NDP 19, Lib 10, PV 21.
Mr. Christopherson? Yes. Madame la Tendresse? Mr. Scott? Yes. Mr. Sims?
Yes, and happy birthday.
Mr. McKenzie? No. Mr. Lukiski? Mr. Opitz? Mr. Reid?
No.
Mr. Richards?
No.
So NDP 19, Lib 10, and PV 21 have been defeated. We'll move on to Liberal 11 as the next one. Oh, sorry. That was Clause 19. That finishes Clause 19. Shall Clause 19 carry? Yes? On division. Fine. Now we'll move to Liberal 10, or Liberal 11. Yep. And does it conflict with anything? Yep. Yes. PV 22. It has a line conflict, so again they'll be the same piece. So Liberal 11, Mr. Sims.
Yeah, well, I think this carries on the same general theme. Returning officers appoint deputy returning poll clerks as 20 days before. I think we don't actually know, it's slightly different, obviously. This is a technical fix. Within 24 hours of appointing the deputy DRO poll clerks, the returning officer shall send a written notice of the appointments of the candidates. Obviously, as you can read, I think that's pretty self-explanatory, so I just get to the vote.
All right. Ms. May, PV 22 is part of this, and it's slightly different. Few words on it?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Our attempt here, of course, is to ensure that, as in previous defeated amendments, that poll clerks are appointed and deputy returning officers and poll clerks will be appointed solely on the basis of merit, and the process should be fair and transparent. There's some sub-clauses, but they all go to the effect of appointing poll clerks and returning officers on the basis of merit, and then timely notification to registered parties and registered candidates. Yes, largely to the same effect, but slightly different wording. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All in favor of Lib 11? Sorry? Recorded vote on Lib 11 and PV 22. Mr. Lukiski asked to call his name first.
Mr. Christopherson?
Yes.
Madame la Tendresse? Mr. Scott?
Yes.
Mr. Sims? Yes. Mr. Lukiski?
No, but happy birthday to both of you.
Mr. McKenzie?
No.
Mr. Opitz?
No.
Mr. Reid?
No.
Mr. Richards?
No.
Defeated.
Clause 20. Is defeated. Then we're on to Clause 20. Shall Clause 20 pass? Division, great. All right, we're into NDP 20.
And this is a, I will move it, NDP 20. This concerns the registration officers. The system in question within the Canada Elections Act, tweaked by C-23, again involves a system of appointing after nomination lists from parties. Those lists can be closed, so it becomes de facto pure nominations. And again, to be consistent, this is a whole package that this would have been if we'd been succeeding on each vote. Each registration officer shall be appointed by the returning officer on the basis of merit, following a process that is fair and transparent. And I should also just say that if we had, if the government had been on side, government MPs had been on side with this, towards the end of these amendments, we would have had a, this would have been NDP 22. This is sort of closing out the package. We would have, having listened a bit to what the government was saying and their own concerns, we would have proposed that the Chief Electoral Officers shall publish guidelines on the criteria and procedures associated with appointing electoral workers on the basis of merit, following a process that's fair and transparent. We would have put in a for greater certainty clause, showing that persons associated with political parties and persons nominated by candidates of parties in any election are fully entitled to be appointed on the same basis as any other person. And we would have created a mechanism, not a cumbersome one, but a basic way in which parties could direct people to Elections Canada or the returning officer to make sure that they're considered under this process. So if we had succeeded with deputy returning officers, poll clerks, and now the registration officer, I kind of realize we're not going to succeed. We would have been trying to assuage some of the concerns of the governing side that this process nonetheless would have produced appointments of election day officials that are, let's just say in our words, in our view, fit for the 21st century. We do think that elections commissions around the world generally are responsible for appointment of election day workers. Scrutineers are the party's business. Election day workers are should be Elections Canada. And that is why this would have been, this is the third of the three amendments, and I hereby move it.
Thank you very much. This will also affect or include Liberal 12 and PV 23, as their similarity is there. All right. So, those in favour of NDP 20. Sorry, I did not give either of you an opportunity to speak to your pieces.
I have a point of order.
You do? Let's
I want
fire
to
it.
ask, can I just ask for clarification, first of all? Did you lump Lib 12 in with that?
Yes, I did.
I'm finding it's a little different.
It is different, but it's changing the same lines.
But true, but we're also talking about some matters in here that may be of concern, such as at least 24 days before polling day, and also Part 4. With your direction, how do we proceed with this if I feel I don't necessarily agree with lumping that in? Or linking them, sorry.
First of all, you know that your chair makes so few mistakes, but,
Oh, understood.
I'll ask for advice.
Understood. That's why I'm as shocked as you are. Carrying your briefcase, but I didn't win.
I'm told we can do them three separately. When one's defeated, you can propose the next one, but I think you're probably going to know by then how it's going to turn out. But so, do we want to do it that way, or do we want it, the fact that they're trying to change the same line three times, do it at one?
Of course, we spent time doing this.
Okay, then let's do it. NDP 20 by itself. Those in favour? Recorded vote.
Mr. Christopherson? Yes. Madame La Tendresse? Mr. Scott? Mr. Sims? Yes. Mr. Dukiski?
No.
Mr. McKenzie?
No.
Mr. Opitz? Mr. Reid? Mr. Richards? Defeated.
Okay, all right. It was a silent, yes. That is defeated. Lib 12 and PV 23 are exact, so we will deal with them the same way, at the same time.
Well, I was hoping for a vote on Lib 12 as well. So,
Yeah, you'll get it, and
Okay,
it will include PV 23. Madam, Ms. May, would you like a comment, because it is yours?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I understand your recognition that these are substantially similar, but they are only slightly differently worded. But I think it's important to recognize that we have the opportunity here before committee not to make this a pro forma exercise, but to really look at each amendment. We have the opportunity here to remove partisanship from the selection of poll workers and registration officers. The current draft of C-23 solicits the names of candidates for these positions from those parties who have finished first and second in that riding. And in that, we have created the perception of partisanship in poll workers. I think that's an important thing to emphasize. That's why all the opposition amendments at this point are trying to put in place the principle that was so well expressed by the evidence of Mr. Neufeld, that choosing poll workers, registration officers, poll supervisors solely on the basis of merit will increase public confidence in our voting system. We're running through the amendments relatively quickly at this point, and I understand that, but I just want to emphasize the point of principle here, that it will enhance the fairness and the perception of fairness in the entire voting process if no partisan operatives are involved in recommending registration officers. With that, I'll close.
Thank you. Although contrary to what certain high school math teachers might say about my ability, I have the ability to do math, and after the last vote have an idea how this is going to go, which is why with this stack here, I'd like to move as reasonably, sensibly, quickly as we can. But on Lib 12, please, those in favour. Recorded vote.
Mr. Christopherson?
Yes.
Madame Latendresse?
Oui.
Mr. Scott?
Yes.
Mr. Sims? Mr. Lukowski?
No.
Mr. McKenzie?
No.
Mr. Opitz? No. Mr. Reid?
No.
Mr. Richards?
No.
Defeated.
It's defeated. So I carry with it PV 23. Liberal 13. Oh, sorry. Shall clause 21 carry before we go to Liberal 13?
On division.
On division. Done. Mr. Sims on Liberal 13. Any?
No, should we have NDP 21st first?
Well, it's not the order it's in here. So you're saying NDP 21 is NDP 21 is first. Sorry, Mr. Sims.
Not the way we have it either. 21 with others?
How come?
I don't know how.
If I can make it easier, I decline to move 21.
Okay. Then that leaves me with Liberal 13.
And that would be NDP 22.
No, with NDP 22.
Will we be getting to 13 and PV 24? Yeah. Okay, it's right after.
Yeah, that's right after these, apparently.
NDP 22, I also will decline to move because given the way the votes have been going, I explained this would have been the section
To where we were going to go.
setting out guidelines, but it's a little bit redundant.
All right.
Something else.
Liberal 13. Mr. Sims.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to quickly say, deleting part of clause, remove partisan activity from administration of elections.
Okay.
That's it.
All right.
It's a vote.
Did you move it?
I so move.
Yeah, thanks. Then on Lib 13. Oh, and it affects something, doesn't it?
Yeah, PV 4.
PV 24. Being exact. Okay. Mr. Scott?
Just a point of information, and it might be for legislative clerk or maybe PCO people, folks, guests. If I understand this, now that we have passed everything else, this is effectively the current wording of Section 41 in Clause 22 is quite consequential on what we've already adopted, and that to vote against this would actually create almost textual confusion in the Act?
Lib 13 would remove the changes to the transposition of results process, and that's a process after there's a redistribution to determine which are the parties that finished first and second in the electoral district.
Exactly, but at the moment, the C-23 amendment adds registered associations and registered parties, which in the existing Section 41 don't exist. So here, having lost all along, I'm just worried that if we vote with Mr. Sims on this one, we're going to leave in place a provision that doesn't reference registered associations or parties, which we've already voted to include. So,
Does that make this out of order? No? Then I guess we're voting on it.
so we'll vote against it.
So I would call the vote. And you'd like a recorded vote?
No, it's fine.
No, you're fine. Okay. So Liberal 13 on division, defeated on division. It's a good try, but I'm still awake right now. So, yeah. Okay. Yes, and that would then do the same thing with PV 24. Thank you. Which then leaves us, am I at Lib 14, Liberal 14 and PV 25.
Identical, so the vote on the first one applies to the other.
Right. The vote on one applies to the other, same as just a minute ago. Ms. May, would you like to do the honors on this one?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, this is an PV 25 is again back to clause 22, and our intention here is to and again, the likelihood here is that, as in the previous commentary, in trying to make the Act work in relation to the redistribution of ridings, if we were going to have adopted the previous motions, this is an important consequential amendment. But since we are not at this point, since we haven't accepted the previous amendments, I'm not sure, Mr. Chair. I mean, if I were moving this, I might not move it, but since it's deemed to have been moved by the strange process on which I am now operating, I don't know how to approach it other than to say the previous votes have made this one rather problematic.
So let's just go to the vote and maybe.
That way. No, we could have said, would that work
Yeah,
for
you guys, whoever deemed this to be put forward could deem it to be removed. I'm not sure how the deeming process works.
I think the easiest way is let's just try the vote on it and see what happens. So on Lib 14, PV 25, those in favor? Seeing nobody in favor?
I'm sorry, I was in the side conversation. I'm sorry, Chair.
Lib 14 and PV 25. Anybody in favor? A recorded vote. Certainly. Okay.
Mr. Christopherson.
No.
Madame La Tendresse. Mr. Scott.
No.
Mr. Sims.
Yes.
Mr. Lukiski.
No.
Mr. McKenzie.
No.
Mr. Opitz. No. Mr. Reid.
No.
Mr. Richards.
No.
Defeated.
It's defeated. Mr. Scott, you'll tell me when we're supposed to get to NDP 18. Are we there? Oh, no. No, not yet. Okay. So then we need clause 22. Shall clause 22 carry? Super. Done. We're now at NDP 23.
Okay.
That's the one they will not vote for, right?
Yeah.
I'm rooting for that.
Wait.
Okay, so, Mr. Chair, I'm just going to explain what I'm doing, just so there's no confusion. And yeah,
I have a ruling on your amendment.
oh, okay. As long as it's inadmissible, I wasn't going to move it.
Well, if you're not going to move it, then it takes it out of play anyway. An amendment to a bill that was referred to committee after second reading is out of order if it's beyond the scope and principle of the bill.
So, NDP 24?
NDP 24.
Yes.
Save that.
So what I'm just going to give the legislative clerk notice of this. I'm not going to move this, 24. I'm not going to move 25. In order for us to get to a vote on Clause 23, which we will be voting to delete, and hoping expecting the government to as well. And so that everybody knows that this is part of the process, maybe Tom might want to speak to, part of the process of when we get to that point of deleting, of returning the Canada Elections Act back to its existing provisions on central poll supervisors. But the last thing is, I will be moving to add a section 42.1, which is the same in substance as this, but that's after we get rid of. Okay?
So right now, we're on Clause 23 carry.
Nope.
No.
One
So
recorded vote.
will that in effect then empty clause? Yeah. Yeah. Mr. Lukiski, were you about to speak? Or?
No, I was just about to say the same thing, that the government will be voting, just to confirm what I said yesterday, the government will be voting to vote down Clause 23, so that we revert back to the status quo beforehand.
Okay. So 23 has been voted against. Right. Oh, you want that? Okay. I'm sorry. Here I was basking in the unanimous. Yeah. Okay.
Mr. Christopherson.
No.
Madame La Tendresse.
No.
Mr. Scott.
No.
We're going to win one.
Mr. Sims.
No.
Mr. Lukiski.
No.
Mr. McKenzie.
No.
Mr. Opitz.
No.
Mr. Reid. Mr. Richards.
No.
Appears as though great thought went into it, though. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to go to Mr. Scott because he's got a new thing.
Yeah. So everybody who has NDP 24 in front of them, I'm basically would like to move this as in the following way, that Bill C-23 in Clause 23 be amended by adding after line 34, although it's been deleted, but the following, and then where it says section 42, that would read 42.1, and then the text would be the same as you see in front of you. In making appointments of electoral workers, returning officers shall give special consideration to recruiting youths, I guess that's English, yeah, who are 16 years of age and older. Subsection 2, the Chief Electoral Officer may develop programs designed to assist in the recruiting and training of youths as electoral workers, which programs may be part of or otherwise connected to public education and information programs, including civic education in schools, colleges, and universities. And so when I hand this over in writing, because I've written that up here,
Okay.
I think that makes it
Yes,
official.
you've done it then. You've moved it.
Yeah. Okay. So I've moved it, and I think it's obvious that this can stand with everything that still exists in the Canada Elections Act that has been kept in place or slightly modified by the C-23 to this point, because it's still the case that returning officers do appoint people. For example, when parties have not actually used their right to nominate people that end up getting appointed. In that context, one of the recommendations that has appeared in at least one Chief Electoral Officer report is that one of the best opportunities to inculcate a sense of civic engagement in youth is to actually begin to realize that they're a source of E-Day workers, and that they might actually be, especially in their late teens, when they're in like the last 2 to 3 years of high school, they could be available potentially, for example, in by-elections, etc., for more than one election, and they may, as part of this, be even more likely to be engaged by the democratic process. That's the thinking behind the amendment, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Further comment on the amendment Mr. Scott has put in? Seeing none. Those in favour, recorded vote. All right.
Mr. Christopherson?
Yes.
Madame La Tendresse?
Oui.
Mr. Scott? Mr. Sims?
Yes.
Mr. Lukiski?
No.
Mr. McKenzie?
No.
Mr. Opitz? Mr. Reid?
No.
Mr. Richards?
No.
Defeated.
It is defeated. I have next.
Shall close 24, Karen?
Well, shall clause 24 carry? Sure. Okay. Next, PV 26. Ms. May?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. PV 26 moves us into a really important area of substantial amendments to the bill. It was one of the problems identified with the current way in which political parties operate by numerous commentators, both by Chief Electoral Officer Mayrand, by Democracy Watch, by a number of people who testified before the committee. And it certainly has troubled me ever since I left what I call NGO world, Sierra Club, where we had to abide by the Privacy Act and the treatment of the names of our members, to find that Canada's privacy laws don't apply to registered political parties. We have a lot of examples of fairly invasive practices by political parties in maintaining databases of huge amounts of information on Canadians without their knowledge and without their permission. And of course, if political parties were not exempted from the Privacy Act, such behavior would be outrageous. Somehow political parties are outside the normal rules of privacy protection of every other body and agency that operates in Canada. So my amendment here would create a new section 24.1 that would be inserted at page 18 to ensure that the collection, use, disclosure, and retention of Canadians' personal information by political parties would be is subject to commonly accepted principles of privacy protection, transparency, and accountability. Political parties shall develop and make available upon request policies and practices necessary to ensure compliance with Schedule 1 of the Personal Information Protection Electronic Documents Act. The rest of it is consequential to that. Obviously, if there's a further Clause 3, that if a political party fails to comply, the Chief Electoral Officer may withhold from that political party any information contained in the list of electors. I find it very troubling that when, in the world of Big Brother, nobody has bigger databases on Canadians than the larger political parties. And no offense to my colleagues across the way, but I think the SIMS database has them all beat. We have information on what people buy, what they own, where they shop, where they worship. And I really think that all of us, as members of political parties, should be troubled by this exemption. I don't have a lot of hope that you're about to pass it, but I really want to make the case that I bet your constituents would be really proud of you to vote to ensure that political parties are not above the laws of privacy in this country.
Thank you. Mr. Lukiski, sorry. I've got to catch your, I've got to sit straight.
No, that's fine. I'll speak out if I want to be heard. I just want to, basically for the benefit of Ms. May and anybody else who may be watching and listening to the discussion, inform the committee why the government will be voting against this clause. And that is simply because the CEO, Michel Maron, indicated in his last report that he would be consulting the newly appointed Advisory Committee of Political Parties on this very issue. And I think that is probably the best way to proceed on that, rather than arbitrarily making a decision with the new clause inserted in the Fair Elections Act. I think the consultation process with the Committee of Political Parties would be the best way to go. I know that discussion will be held. This issue will be dealt with, hopefully, at that time, and I think that's appropriate. That's why we will be voting against Ms. May's endeavour.
Just a point of clarification from Tom then. When did the Chief Electoral Officer, around when, announce that? When did he announce that?
In his last report.
In his last report? Okay, I missed that, actually. Okay, that's interesting. Thank you. Okay.
Okay. PV 26, all in favor? All opposed? It's defeated. Where am I now? Can Clause 26 carry?
It's 25.
Sorry,
It's 25, but Mr. Sims has an amendment he wants to propose.
Mr. 25. Go ahead, Mr. Sims.
My
Before we get there,
apologies
apparently.
for the lack of notice and the second language notice as well, but I want to do this verbally. This is something we decided to do this evening, so I'm going to give people some time to look it up. If you go to page 18, Clause 25.
Yep.
Page 18 of the bill, yes, my
Poor
apologies.
paperless, right?
This is page 18, clause 25. Now, you can go to line 11, but 25A is where I'll read from.
Got it?
The name and political affiliation, if any, of each candidate as stated in the nomination papers in order in which their names are to be placed in the ballots, the name of the official agent for each candidate. I am proposing that the wording be the name, as postal code, community, and political affiliation, if any. So basically, I'm inserting the community in which they reside and the postal code of that community.
This is on a ballot, am I right? Is that where we're at?
That's correct.
Yes, okay.
Yeah. I'd just like to, I'm sorry.
Mr. Lukiski, I'll go to Mr. Scott after that. Did I see a hand over here? Yeah, great.
I just wanted to ask a question of Scott as to why.
Well, I think the way I look at it is this. I think where people reside within the community, if they are to become the direct representative, I think it's important within the minds of voters to know where it is they reside, if they reside there or not, has become a very important issue. And I think that should be stated clearly as political affiliation is.
I have Mr. Scott, then I'll go to Mr. Reid.
Mine was actually just a point of clarification, which is what other identifiers had you asked to add? Community and?
Postal code, community, and political name. Postal
Political
code.
affiliation stays the same as postal code community.
Right,
Postal code community is the addition.
right,
Postal code?
and postal code.
My system brought up a good point. Prior to this, it was address. We're talking about now the registration where you go into the polling booth, right?
Right.
So before this, it was your address, your specific address. That has been taken out,
A few elections ago.
right? Now what we've got, what I want to say is that it shows them their political affiliation, which is what it says,
Right,
as well as community and postal code.
right. Mr. Scott, you still have the floor.
Yeah, yeah. So this is, yeah. Forgive me, Scott. So this is like new. We haven't had a chance to think about it. But the, I think the address reference would not. It's not in the current act, right? So there's nothing here that's changed that.
No, I'm sorry. We're talking about when you go in the list of the candidates in the polling booth itself had the address. That's my understanding of it.
But this is for the ballots.
Okay.
This is for the ballots.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
64.2A and B is the notice of grant of polls after
I'm sorry,
the...
could you start that again? I can
Sure. 64.2A and B, so the provision that you're modifying, it's the notice of grant of polls that's posted in the returning office after the confirmation of nomination processes, and it just lists the candidates that were confirmed, as well as their official agents, and currently it requires their addresses to be posted.
Yes.
And so the bill proposes to remove the requirement to post the candidates and the official agents' addresses.
The addresses are removed.
That's right.
Right, okay, that's what I'm looking for. I'm sorry if this causes any more confusion, but this is what I'm going for here. Instead of removing that address, I would like to return their community, not specific address, community and postal code. I'll let you go ahead.
Super, I'm okay with that. At the moment, I'd like you to finish your discussions, so.
Confused about which line.
Oh, is that 25?
Okay.
Question was, just before, I think my colleague has, which line was that inserted on? Was it in B or A? Okay.
This one? After political affiliation.
A.
I'm just going to show it.
You're adding after name and political affiliation, postal code and community?
Address.
Right. So Fine. Name and political affiliation are staying in A.
That remains, yes.
Super. So that's clear. You wanna- Yeah, it's not on the ballot. Your chair said that, and he was incorrect.
And it's replacing address with, but what does community mean? Okay, fine, okay, that's good, thank you.
Mr. Lukiski, or Mr. Scott, you still have the floor. Did you want to finish?
It doesn't have to be answered right away, but Tom can go first. I just wondered is there a definition of community for this purpose? So if I'm
Probably not.
in Toronto, is Toronto my community, or is it whatever?
North York.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. It could be Toronto. It can be Toronto, whatever it is that normally was on your address. Like if you do an address, you have to say where it is.
Okay.
Okay.
So that's where it is.
Mr. Lukiski?
Yeah, I could make some observations. I find it interesting that the Liberals particularly would be advocating this, but I won't. I won't get that political consideration. I will say, however, the government will be voting. No, I will be saying the government will be voting against this only because we've had really little time to consult with our own people on this, and I think the current situation is more than sufficient. I know that there's a number of members of the Liberal Party who tend not to live in the ridings which they are representing, which I find it passing strange, but nonetheless we will be voting against the proposal.
I have Mr. Scott's still there now, and then I would go to you.
Hand up earlier.
Oh, sorry.
We have one of
I
these
did say
things
Mr.
where-
Reid, and then I forgot you were there.
Yeah, I was.
I'm going to go to you, Mr. Reid, because I'm just going to be as fair as I can be.
Okay. Well, first of all, I just want to say how unloved I feel.
I know.
I feel like Casper the Ghost or something. I don't know. You know.
I know your chair accused you of making me invisible the other night, and I've gone and done the same thing with you. So I do apologize.
All right. No, I have just want to see if I can. The Canada Elections Act, as it stands now, says in Section 64(2)(a), the name that what's happened is the returning officer posts in the returning office a notice of grant of poll with the name, address, and political affiliation of the candidates. C23 takes out the address. You're adding back in just the postal code, but no further information. Am I correct?
Community that was associated with your address and the postal code. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But.
Okay, so doesn't that essentially get you back? I mean, I'm assuming this is a more or less universal practice. If I think of the road on which I live, there's like 3 houses or 4 houses that have the same postal code. I don't think it's more than that. So once you've put the community back in, you've put the address back in effectively. Well, I could. I could figure out where a person lives from that. I mean, not just. I mean, I assume. Well, what I'm wondering about is why don't you just say, put the address back in? Why don't you just get rid of that? Because I assume that's your objective, right? Is to.
Am I on the speakers list of this? Or?
Go ahead and answer, because it's just going to make my life easier.
I want people to know where you reside if you are a candidate in this particular election. Now, for reasons of privacy in the past, I realize you want the exact address. Yes, I take your point that in some cases you can deduce as to where they live, but I think that if you're going to give someone a general idea of where that person resides, you use community and you use the postal code. And to Mr. Lukiski's point, I mean, all parties have what we call parachute candidates. I appreciate that. I just think people should know. That's fine if it happens, if you feel that you can do the job here and you want to return and you can still represent a riding that you don't live in. But I think people should know that.
Okay, I think we've got the gist of where we are on this piece. Really want to speak still? Okay.
I just want.
Sorry.
It's turned out to be more interesting than I realized. This was an example of something I hadn't noticed. It's been taken out, and I'm I kind of neutral on it, but I was just wondering if the government, is there a rationale that anybody knows on the government side why it was taken out? Is it privacy reasons? Address?
Well,
Mr. Lukiski?
yeah, a portion of that certainly would be for privacy reasons, but Scott's point, you know, we can agree to disagree, but I mean, the more relevant point is name and the party you represent.
Are the most fundamental things.
Yeah.
Okay, call the question on it. A recorded vote on Sims 1.
Mr. Sims,
Yes.
Mr. Christopherson,
Yes.
Madame La Tendresse.
Wait.
Mr. Scott,
Yes.
Mr. Lukiski,
No.
Mr. McKenzie,
No.
Mr. Opitz,
Who?
Mr. Reid,
No.
Mr. Richards,
No.
Should we have a group then?
defeated.
Oh, try, sure.
43.
All, without stopping?
26. This one was defeated already?
Oh, was defeated already. We get it out of there. Okay, so now we need to pass clause 25 through
25 first?
25 first. Clause 25, good, on division, thank you.
And then you can go 26.
And now I have clauses 26 through 43. Clauses 26 through 43,
That you see. That you see.
okay?
Just a sec, please,
Wait.
Mr. Chair.
Wait, so we're not going to look at the request?
You need UC to do it, but
Okay, I'll go, okay, clause 26. Those in favor of clause 26? Okay, passes. Clause 27. 28. Okay, thought you should wait a minute. Oh, okay, sorry, I misheard. 28, 29. Clause 30. Clause 31. 32. 33. 34. 35, 36, 37, 38, 39. Yes? Independent 2 was defeated early yesterday afternoon, along with something else, apparently. Thank you. 40, Clause 41. Clause 42, Clause 43, I'd like you all remember how that felt. Okay? Keep that feeling in your head. All right? Pardon me? Well, then I feel bad. Okay. NDP 26. Yeah, I'm telling you, they're in that bag. I just want you all to behave properly, all right? NDP 26.
yes. I'm moving it for, again, just the sake of completeness. We've been moving until this point amendments to make the returning officer, therefore Elections Canada, responsible for all appointment of elections officers, the central poll supervisor, in effect, although with different wording in the current act, that is the case. And the C-23 changed that and made central poll supervisors subject to the effectively de facto appointment of the candidates or the parties, this is the provision we've got now, who placed first in the last election. And so, therefore, the whole point was that unbalance the system that existed, where at that point, at least the theory of neutrality was that there'd be a deputy returning officer from the first party, poll clerk from the second. This squeezed out any other parties, so it was a problematic system, but nonetheless, this would have unbalanced it. There have been a lot of comments from informed observers, from the NDP, from the opposition, to say that that was a mistake to include. And at that point, I won't belabor the point other than to note that the minister did say it was amongst the changes he would support. And I understand that by virtue of voting against Clause 44, the government will return us back to where the Act currently is on central poll supervisors. But before we get there, I'd like to move this and have a vote on this and get to that accomplishment of returning the Canada Elections Act back to a situation where the central poll supervisors would not be appointed by the first place party. So if we could vote on this and then go to Clause Clause 44.
There's others.
Oh.
Yeah, Liberal 15 and PV 27 that we'll have to deal with also.
That's my end goal then, but let's just get through ours.
Okay. Anything else on NDP 26, Mr. Lukiski?
Yeah, just to reconfirm, so everyone's aware of what's happening. The entire Clause 44, which is actually, it's the main clause that originally had proposed to amend the central poll supervisors. The government will be voting against it. We can't just delete it because that's inadmissible. But all of the other, we can go through the, the various clauses that Craig and perhaps others have posed. But I want to assure the members of the opposition the government will be voting against Clause 44, which will in effect go back to the status quo.
Great. So on NDP 26, a recorded vote, please.
Mr. Christopherson? Madame La Tendresse? Oui. Mr. Scott? Mr. Sims?
Yes.
Mr. Lukiski?
No.
Mr. McKenzie?
No.
Mr. Opitz? Mr. Reid?
No.
Mr. Richards?
No.
Defeated.
That gives us, that's defeated, by the way. So,
Flipped. NDP 26 was stood, and I'll just not move it.
okay. What about NDP 18? We're still going to come back to that.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's the one I meant.
That's the one you meant?
NDP 18 is
It's not going in the other pile now. Super.
Point of order, Chair. Just one. I'm sorry. Did you mention Lib 15?
I'm about to.
Oh.
Would you like, what would you, no. We're at Lib 15, which is identical to, or similar to PV 27.
Similar, but I think we should.
It looks identical.
No, they're not identical
No,
at all.
it's same thing
Sorry, Mr.
before,
Chair.
actually. It's.
Okay. So it was not moved. NDP 18.
We should probably finish this clause. And when we're done with this,
Sorry. We'll get back to these in just a second, Mr. Sims. But that means we should now be moving what?
Lib 15.
No, okay, we're going to move Lib 15 first. Great.
I so move, including what was said before, plus parts 4 and 5, as you can see, which lays out the intention of this.
Right. Further discussion? Seeing none. Lib 15.
Recorded vote, please.
Recorded vote.
Mr. Sims? Mr. Christopherson?
Wait.
Madame La Tendresse?
Yes.
Mr. Scott?
Yes.
Mr. Lukiski?
No.
Similar enough.
Mr. McKenzie?
No.
Mr. Opitz?
Do it.
Mr. Reid?
No.
Mr. Richards?
No.
Then we can do the clause 44 and then come back.
That's defeated. We'll move to PV 27. Ms. May.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm sorry for jumping in to point out that this wasn't identical. Yes, in the sense that the electoral district shall be appointed, the representatives shall be appointed based on merit. The significant difference from previous amendments that's found in this particular amendment, PV 27, is based on recommendations from the Chief Electoral Officer, as well as Democracy Watch, as well as Mr. Neufeld particularly. The Neufeld report, in looking at, and there's no question there's been controversy through the period since first reading of C-23 over the content of the Neufeld report. There's no question that the review of the 2011 election by Mr. Neufeld at the Commission of the Elections Canada reflected there were a number of errors. And the errors were not, as you'll recall from testimony, related to attempts at fraud, apparent fraud, or even suspicion of fraud. But what they did relate to is that our electoral system depends on a lot of people being hired at the last minute, not necessarily receiving adequate training. So the key difference in this amendment from previous ones is to allow the returning officer to appoint the central poll supervisors 180 days before the writ. Now, you'll recall from Mr. Neufeld's testimony how significant he feels it is that we stick to fixed election dates, and that then you know when the writ's going to be, and then that you can start bringing in the chief election day workers well enough ahead that they get the training they need to reduce error rates. I mean, we have an electoral system that if you stepped back and were inventing it from scratch, you wouldn't invent this system. We've eliminated the enumeration. We don't have a voters list that's reliable. We're now relying on multiple pieces of identification. We have a bunch of people picked by political parties who are appointed at the last minute and not given adequate training. This is an attempt to say that for those central poll supervisors who play such an important role, let's hire them early and make sure that they're the bulwark of the system with adequate, in fact, excellent training. And I'll end there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
PV 27. Further comment? Seeing none?
Hello?
Oh, sorry, Madam La Tendresse, I even have your name written down.
Thank
I know.
I have a question. Maybe Madam May can answer me, or the folks in there. In English, it says the returning officer may appoint the central poll supervisor as of 188 days before the issue of the writ. In French, it says dès la date de délivrance du bref. So I just want to have a clarification on this.
Scrutin peut nommer les superviseurs de centre du scrutin dans les dates de délivrance du bref.
So it means
Assurer que c'est le même.
I am sure that it's the equivalent in French, but I'm not certain why.
Or is it on the day of the issue of the writ?
It's supposed to be 180 days before the writs. That's the same in English as in French. And I'm afraid I'm also confused as to whether they've made a mistake in the drafting. They told me when I asked that question, le centre du scrutin des dates de délivrance.
That the words centre du scrutin dès la date de délivrance.
Error there, but I thought that, but I was assured it was the same. So.
It would be corrected, am I right?
Yeah, that could mean the same thing, but I don't know if it is indeed the same. But probably the expert will probably.
We'll have to ask the people from the Privy Council.
No, there's a difference between the two language versions. So the English version allows them to the returning officer to appoint as of 180 days before the issue of the writs. And the French version allows them to do it as soon as the writs are issued.
Oh, I'm afraid I was afraid of that actually, Alexandrine, and because the drafters we worked with had said that it would come out to be the same thing, but I didn't see it either. So I'm afraid that there is a difference between the English and the French versions.
But you do mean it to be 180 days?
I mean it to be 180 days ahead.
Right. Can we go ahead with that? Since we all know that now.
You can change that by unanimous consent?
That's very kind of you, because it is a difference between the English and the French. Thank you.
All right. On PV 27, with us all knowing it means 180 days. All in favor? 4. All those opposed? Right. That's defeated. Okay, clauses. We've got clauses. Clause 44. Shall it carry?
They want to vote against it.
Recorded vote.
You let me down.
It's a symbolic.
Okay. Go.
Mr. Lukiski. Mr. McKenzie.
No.
Mr. Opitz.
No.
Mr. Reid.
No.
Mr. Richards.
No.
Mr. Christopherson.
Yes.
He means no.
We're voting no, we're getting rid of it.
You're confusing me. Usually you're a helpful professor, but you're confusing me.
Mr. Christopherson.
No.
Madame La Tendresse.
No.
Mr. Scott.
If I ever need you to vote no, it's now. No.
Mr. Sims.
Rest, I'm going to have to say no.
All right. It is defeated. Now, where were we? There was another clause we had to go back to.
We have to go to this one first.
Okay? Your NDP 18, I'm being told we have to do.
Does he want to withdraw it, or?
He wanted to withdraw it.
Okay,
So we have to vote on clause 18.
Now I just declined to move it. That's what I'd said before.
Right.
So that's fine.
But we haven't finished the clause. Shall clause 18 carry?
Non, il n'a pas
Sure. So clause, is that correct? Clause 18, carry on division.
Oui.
All right, now we're cut back up to clause 40, clause 45. And so we need to carry, does clause 45 carry? All right, great. We're at Lib 16, Liberal 16.
Yeah, I so move. Very simply, this allows not just the leader of a party to be subject to a barrage of photographs, but also, or the media. It also allows each and every other candidate. I think this goes to freedom of the press. Please do not mistake that as being particularly vain myself, as to want my picture taken. Simple as that. It's just all candidates can be exposed to.
In a polling station, okay.
Yes.
Mr. Scott, on that issue?
I should know this, but I don't. I don't have the act in front of me. Is because this is a sidebarred provision, is what's in there now a change from the previous act, and are we changing it back to what it was, or to something entirely different? Or
The act allowing for media representatives to be at the polls. And this was a recommendation of the Chief Electoral Officer that for ridings where there's a party leader, that media be allowed. And so the bill provides that in ridings where a party leader is a candidate, then the media can have access to the polling station to film the leader and the other candidates voting.
In that EDM. You're asking for it to be all polls?
Sure.
All candidates, okay.
Yes, all candidates.
Further discussion?
So
Sure, go ahead.
It's not really a philosophical issue. This is more a practicality matter. So I think we're all in agreement that when the leaders go in, those photo ops are needed. The only thing that we were wondering is, are we setting ourselves up? That does throw people a little. That's why we need to. That's why we have prohibition against that happening. This makes an exception for the leader plus the candidates. The leader we accept. If we get into the candidates, though, some ridings end up with 8, 10 candidates, and that could be fairly disruptive. So we're just, if you're just thinking about the incumbent or one or two, it may not be that big a deal. But if you extend the right, it's got to be for everybody on that ballot. And that means you could have, theoretically, 8 to a dozen sort of bits of circus happening during that time. Your thoughts on that? Just we're wondering whether that's really in the best interest of the stability of the office. We'll make the one exception, but should we maybe just hold it there?
I see your point clearly. The practicality of it may throw some challenges into this. There's no doubt. My assumption is this, that the poll supervisors are able to manage it in such a way that they do not interfere with people voting or lining up to register, whatever it may be. I just think that if you're going to move ahead and allow media access to the leader, I think that should be extended to anyone who puts themselves onto the ballot. The practicality of it, as you point out, I take it clearly, but I think that the poll clerks and I think that the supervisors have enough experience such that they can manage it.
Okay, if I may, Chair. Thank you. Appreciate that.
It's freedom of
I've been a candidate 11 times, and every time I've done anything like that, when there was interest, we would just do it outside the polling station. They'd get the shot they want. We'd just do a quick little clip. They'd get me walking down the thing, and I never really at any time thought, gee, I wish I could have got that clip me being inside, because it really didn't matter. So I'm not against it, just on me personally. I'm not against it. I'm just not yet convinced that that's an improvement that we need to do, given that candidates, I've been very successful when the media wants to do that with me. I just meet them outside. They talk to me before or after I go in. We do a little cutaway of me walking down the street. I don't know, it seems to work.
But Mr. Christopherson, my problem with that is that this would be your call to do that outside. I think if a particular member of the media would rather have you captured voting as opposed to talking, I think that's their call and they should have the freedom to do that.
Yeah.
I'm going to Mr. McKenzie.
Yeah, one final point.
Go ahead.
Well, it's just, if you're going to extend it to the leader, I understand that person is the leader, but he or she is also just a name on the ballot like everybody else. It just shows a bias.
Okay, Mr. McKenzie.
Chair, I would be opposed to it, and I recognize that Ms. May will likely vote on Election Day, and she will, get her picture there. For perhaps 1,000 candidates across Canada, they may very well vote in the advance poll, and I can't think of a better opportunity to get advance publicity than calling the press and saying that the candidate is going to be at the advance poll 2 weeks before Election Day. I just don't think it's a good idea, Scott.
If I might just add something else, Mr. Sims, that may help you with your thought here before we vote. And the chair doesn't do this very often, but as Mr. Christopherson has said, it may involve 8 to 10 people, depending on the. But that would be 8 to 10 different polling stations across the riding. They don't all go vote at the same one, and so you're suggesting poll supervisors could do it, but now we're going to train 12 of them to do it. So if they're all at different. Yeah. No, if I'm in the same riding as the leader, he and I may not share the same polling station.
One last point, last point, and this is it's an enjoyable discussion. It's too bad we didn't do the whole bill this way. But let me just say that when I've done international election observing missions, one of the key things you look for is the atmosphere in the voting station. Is it stable? Are there outside interferences that are creating distractions? And one of the things you're looking for from beginning to close is as much stability as possible. And so I remain unconvinced that this is necessarily an improvement, given that as a candidate I have found my ability, my media has never said, gee, Dave, this really sucks because we couldn't do it inside. So with respect, I'm going to be voting against.
Madame Latendresse.
Oui, en fait, c'est pour...
Yes, I would like to tell my colleagues, Mr. Chair, Mr. Reid, Mr. Lukiski, and Mr. Christopherson, we discussed this before when we looked at the report of the Chief Electoral Officer, and one of my problems with that is that people who come to vote would be afraid to go in if there are lots of cameras around. Perhaps I will be intimidated when I go to vote if there are a lot of cameras filming the leader or other candidates. It's fine for the leader. Of course, certain electors, certain voters might be turned off by this, though, so I wouldn't support this amendment.
We're at the stage of Liberal 16.
No, I
have a feeling where it's going. No, go ahead.
I see her point. I wasn't going to say anything, but she does bring up a good point. It's valid. But what I'm saying is that you've extended this to several candidates and not them all. And I think that's probably the problem here.
Okay. Those in favor of Liberal 16? Okay, and those against? That is defeated. Monsieur Bellavance. I have block, no,
Monsieur Bellavance?
hang on. Clause 46, shall it carry? Yes? On division, certainly. And clause 47? Okay. Now I'm at block 3. You get a few minutes to tell us why you think this is the greatest clause on earth.
Est-ce que, Monsieur le Président, on fait bloc 3 et...
Yes, we will put together block 3 and 4 because they have exactly the same purpose. That is to not allow the vote with an uncovered face. The other place is somewhere else.
Répéter les mêmes arguments.
Not having to respond or repeat the same argument.
All right. Right. Okay. So it goes with. All right. Let's block 3. Those in favor?
No. Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, if I may. Mr. Chair.
Speak further on it.
Oui.
Okay. Sure.
Yes, please.
Non, Monsieur le Président, ce que je demandais...
Mr. Chair, I just want us to make sure we understand each other. Can we do block 3 and block 4 now?
Remember how you presented this, so when we get to block 4...
If he wants to have the votes apply to both.
The vote apply to both.
Oui. On pourrait voter sur les deux en même temps, ça porte sur le même sujet. Puis
we can vote on both at the same time, they're on the same topic, and I think it'll shorten things.
Juste sur les miens. Yeah. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Oui, je serai bref.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be concise, for you know the topic. In 2007, Mr. Chair, the CEO decided to change the rules and enabled voting with a covered face. It wasn't clear. The PM said that he was very much against the CEO's decision, and there was a block bill to amend the Election Act. There was one of the Conservative Party in the speech from the throne. There was information disclosed by the Conservative government in 2011. The current Minister, Stephen Blaney, introduced a private members bill regarding voting with a veiled face. Now, the Bloc Québécois just wants to make things correspond with what's occurring in Quebec. Anybody who goes to a polling station to vote has to do so with their faces uncovered, just like when you are seeking a passport, a photo, a license for a driver's license. And the Conservatives had supported that measure, and I'd like them to support my amendment. I know that the other parties have voted against it, but if we can convince the Conservatives this evening, that would be a good thing. It's a question of fairness for all voters. They should be able to vote. They must vote without their faces covered. Ms. Latendresse. I'll be very quick. Personally speaking, the way this amendment is drafted, well, I'm not going to vote for it because there's no exception, there's no accommodations listed. For example, someone who's a severe burn victim wouldn't be able to have bandages on their face, so I can't vote for this amendment.
Block 3 and also covering then block 4. Recorded vote.
Mr. Lekiski.
No.
Mr. McKenzie.
No.
Mr. Opitz.
No.
Mr. Reid.
No.
Mr. Richards.
No.
Mr. Christopherson.
No.
Madame Latendresse.
Non.
Mr. Scott.
No.
Mr. Sims.
No.
It is defeated, and that would defeat block 4. Also then, we will move on to Government 5. Now, Government 5 has a line conflict with NDP 30, Lib 18, PV 29, NDP 31, and NDP 32.
A bit slower.
Sure I can.
Thank you.
It has a line conflict with NDP 30, Liberal 18, PV 29, NDP 31, and NDP 32. So we're on Government 5, Mr. Lukiski.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll move this. This is getting down to the section of the Act when we talk about ID requirements when voting. Now, we've heard the argument that not so much ID as to who you are, but the residency requirements as to where you live seems to be the major problem. We've heard that time and time again from people that made interventions. In fact, it seemed that the vast majority of people did not seem to have a problem with producing identification to prove who they were. It was only the residency that seemed to be the sticking point. So therefore, we're suggesting that to overcome that problem of not being able to prove residency, that rather than vouching, we would have someone who has, number one, a proper piece of identification showing who they are. They can have another voter from the same polling station who has both proper identification as to who they are and where they live, sign a written oath of residency. And the voter himself, who doesn't have the proper residency requirements, will be required to co-sign the oath attesting the voter's address. In other words, we would have a similar situation to what currently occurs in Manitoba. Everyone, just to be clear, everyone will have to prove who they are. They will have to have a proper form of identification. But through the signing of an oath, or attestation as some people would call it, we can allow those people without proper identification of residency still to vote. And that's what this amendment is about. And I'll leave it at that because I'm sure there are members from the opposition side that have questions on this amendment.
Mr. Scott?
Thank you. Okay, great. Sorry. So I'm just double checking. Am I right in hearing that because of the line conflict, so NDP 30 and 31 are all cannot be dealt with as a result?
And 32.
And 32?
Yep.
Correct.
Okay. So just for the record, NDP 30 and 31 would have been the NDP's amendments to basically restore the Canada Elections Act to the vouching provisions that are there that we've lived with in this country, well, until the C-23. But by virtue of the line conflict, we won't be able to move that, so we will discuss vouching in the context of this amendment. Just wanted to be on record that those two amendments can't be put forward. So I would have to say this is welcome, although it also has problems in scope. It's welcome in the sense that the committee did indeed hear amongst its 71 witnesses a lot of groups and representatives of groups who very articulately set out why it was that removing vouching from the Canada Elections Act could impact them, large numbers of different sectors of society. We already knew that about 120,000 people had vouched in the 2011 election. And what happened in committee is a face was put on that for, I would say, a good chunk of the folks who would have been in a position needing to vouch. So at that level, the outcry across Canada about the removal of vouching appears to have had an effect.
Yeah, here.
And I can only say that I welcome and am glad that the government is putting forward an amendment to their withdrawing of vouching, which institutes a vouching by address system, where one piece of ID plus vouching is going to be allow people to vote. Couple of concerns that I do want to flag, and see if we can talk through them and get to the point of a possible very small amendment. I'm not sure if people following the committee remember we had testimony. We had testimony from a professor who works with the homeless in London, Ontario. Yeah, and I'm on Abe. Yeah, Udhorn. That's right, Professor Udhorn. Abe Udhorn. That's right, and he basically described an organized process of vouching in London. Social workers and community workers on the day of the election will take clients who show up at their agency to polling stations and vouch for them. He later explained that this meant they would obviously have to pair them up for the specific polling division, so because you can only vouch within your polling division. This was made easier for a number of elections on one of our biggest agencies. London Intercommunity Health Centre was a polling station, for example. That made it easier. Staff there were kept busy each vouching, and that he predicts, this is exactly how you said it? Yeah. And he predicted by the end of the day it was very hard to find a London social worker who hadn't vouched for somebody. He explained it as follows, quote, this was part of our testimony. When a person experiencing homelessness but without identification enters an agency and expresses an interest in voting, often the agencies have a sign that says, ask us how you can vote. They are connected with someone who can vouch for them, whether it's someone who works in the agency or another person who's homeless who's also said they would like to vote, and obviously can be able to vote on their own. They will be accompanied by someone who can vouch for them at the polling station. This is made simpler in our community because one or more of the serving agencies use our polling stations, and it makes it a little easier for everyone in terms of the walking. So the reason I've taken time to set this out is that one of the provisions in Government 5 that sets out the conditions for vouching adds a threshold that doesn't currently exist in either the law or the practice of vouching under the Canada Elections Act, and that's the new section. It'll be subsection 143 sub 3 B sub B sub 2. So it basically says that one of the conditions of being able to vouch for somebody there's two paired together. They know the elector personally, and the second one is they know that the elector resides in the polling division. So that's number 2 and number 3. It's on the second page of the amendment. At the moment, the law effectively is only the second one, the number 3. They know that the elector resides in the polling division because it's taken as a given that when you know that, you actually know the person sufficiently to know that. And there's no test for how well or much more you know the person other than knowing that. By introducing they know the elector personally. Yeah.
Gotcha. I was making a point of letting you know I put you on the list. Thank you. Mr. Sims also. Okay.
Let him speak.
Yeah.
Right.
Go ahead.
So the adding of the language, they know the elector personally, is new in the sense that and it seems to want to be a little bit additional than the idea they know that the elector resides in the polling division. Now, to me, this is a problem because it opens up, it opens up the ability of whatever officer on election day to be able to start asking, do you know this person personally, and make judgment calls. What does personally mean? For how long? In what context? I can see absolute chaos as well as potential unfairness. Inconsistency of application is one form of fairness, and then the unfairness of turning somebody away because an elections officer says, oh, you haven't known them for a year, you haven't known them for a week, you just met them an hour ago, and but you reliably know they live at this address because the social agency that's paired you up with them has indicated that they use your services. So I think the openness, the generality of this is going to produce a real problem of application. But then I have a second concern, and Mr. Richards may remember we had a bit of a discussion on this because under the current Canada Elections Act, the sections on vouching, there is basically the idea of what I was calling citizen-to-citizen vouching is completely acceptable. The idea is you know that the person, where they live, you've come to know them enough that this is the person who lives where you're vouching for them, and that's all that's ever been required. And so this is, I'm hoping not an intention, and I can't imagine an intention, but this is by result potentially an anti-homeless clause, because if you use a system like London described or anything that's similar to it, there's a danger that the threshold of knowing the person personally won't be met. The citizen-to-citizen vouching has literally been written out of the possibility by using the word personally. And whether that means you live in the same division and it's family, you live in the same division, it's a neighbor, you live in the same polling division, and it's somebody else who somehow you know personally, whatever that might mean. I just think it goes far too far for what is otherwise an openness of spirit to everything else that was heard in the days of testimony. And I'm hoping that through some further discussion we can find a way. I will be wanting to amend this to excise it, because I think it's completely unnecessary to start with, and then I do believe it can create barriers. But I'm hoping that on the other side will look at my concerns and say that's not what we intended, and therefore we can work with this. Let's see what we can do. I wanted to flag one last thing about this. So what this does is, well, let me take a step back. In the 2011 election, roughly 900,000 or 1 million people were able to vote by using legally able to vote by authorization of the Chief Electoral Officer, by using the voter information card as proof of address alongside a piece of valid ID. Some figures suggested over 400,000 actually did it that way. Now, we know that one of the government's amendments to the Canada Elections Act in C-23 is to get rid of the use of voter information cards. So we have, let's say, 400,000 people who use these, and we don't know what percentage of them can easily find that piece of ID with an address to replace the voter information card. But we do know that this new system will allow them to come on with their ID, and if they can find somebody voting at the same time or somebody they know, they can have them vouch. What percentage of those 400,000, along with the 120,000 who vouched the last time, who could find a piece of ID, what percentage of all of those are going to need vouching? I actually think there's a big potential for additional red tape here because, and I'll explain this later when we get to voter information cards, because a decent percentage of those 400,000 who use the VIX will remember that they did so. A decent percentage of them actually probably couldn't have found a piece of address ID, and those people will have the only choice now will be to vote with vouching. This will create potential log jams and all kinds of pressure on some polls if that turns out to be the case. What's the solution? That we happily embrace the government's amendment with hopefully this getting rid of this knowing personally business, and we keep voter information cards. Because then what will that do? That will accomplish exactly what Mr. Neufeld in his report recommended. Let's diminish the amount of vouching that's needed. And one way to do that is to increase the use of voter information cards and make them generally available. And if the voter information card's available, you don't get to the vouching fallback here for many people because they will actually be listed and be able to use the voter information card. So, you know, and some of them will be able to find other pieces of address. I recognize that. But there's a danger that this well-intentioned amendment, this government's version of vouching, address vouching, will potentially add to the numbers overall vouching because the VICs are gone. And if the government's content with that, then I just hope Elections Canada can find a way to make sure that they're ready for the pile-up that might occur at some polling stations. And I think the easiest way, again, is to replace it with, to make sure the VICs stay as well as this amendment. And the last thing I'll say in one sentence is, however, there will be people who will not be able to vote because we heard good testimony that made sense on its, just as a matter of logic, that there are some people in society, by the time an election is called, can't lay their hands even on the one piece of identity that would then allow for vouching, plus they would have to find somebody to vouch. There will be cases, it may not be nearly as many as otherwise would be the case if this weren't brought in, but because the right to vote is a constitutional right, and every possible effort should be made to allow anybody entitled to vote, we have to be aware that, as Mr. Lukowski said, he used the word the vast majority would be able to vote using this and the rest of the provisions, the showing ID, but he accepted by using that expression that some people won't. And that ultimately is what the current vouching provisions in the Canada Elections Act are intended to be there for, as the final safety net. And that's also why there are scholars who've begun to write about why not having that kind of final, let's call it full vouching ability, could lead to the absence of that being declared unconstitutional. So I'm delighted to see this. I really do think that the government bringing vouching back into the Canada Elections Act is a positive. I actually thank the government for doing that, for having bent to pressure, frankly, but hopefully members of this committee also conveyed all the testimony they heard, and that played a role. So I'll leave it at that. And after having set out the context, I'm hoping we can have some discussion on this they know the elector personally business.
Mr. Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The purpose, as I understand it, of the section of the amendment that would become subsection 143, sub 3, B, Roman numeral 2, containing the words, "They know the elector personally." The purpose of this requirement, as I understand it, is to make sure that some of the basic qualifications one must have in order to vote are fulfilled. So knowing that someone resides in a polling division which is also required, is of course a good start. But we need to know as well that the individual who is being vouched for is also eligible to vote based on their criteria. You have to be 18 years old to vote. You have to be a Canadian citizen to vote. Now, I will grant there are many people who are obviously over the age of 18. I might submit myself as a case study in this regard. Although I do want to state for the record that I was carded once after I reached the age of 40. True story. But I have a suspicion that I look not like a youth, but rather like a liquor inspector. Anyway, that's my guess. Be that as it may be, there are people, students are an excellent example of this, who may or may not be over the voting age, and often they will look younger than the voting age when in fact they're over, and the reverse. So this is a reasonable thing. You have to know the person personally in order to determine that. The person can easily establish their identity through a piece of identification without being able to establish their age. Likewise, given the large list of types of identification that are acceptable, this includes everything down to utility bills. Most of these things do not include date of birth, nor do they include citizenship. Indeed, I am hard-pressed to think of anything other than a passport that actually serves as identification as to your identity that also indicates whether you are a citizen of Canada. So these are two things that are accomplished in this particular case. I, too, kept careful records of the witnesses who came before this committee raising concerns about individuals who would not be able to vote if vouching were removed and not replaced with something. And I am hard-pressed to think of a plausible example that qualifies. The example that had the greatest resonance with me was the example offered by one of the witnesses who suggested what happens to a woman who has left her violent and abusive husband and is now residing outside her home. Initially, I thought she was making reference to somebody residing in a shelter for battered women. She later on said, no, what I mean is, and I raised some concerns about that. She said, no, I mean someone who's living with her sister. So using either of those two examples, the individual is unlikely to have literally no identification at all. In the event that she's at the shelter for battered women, she is very likely to have, or to be capable of getting, an attestation from the administrator of that home. In the event she's with her sister, there's any number of pieces of identification that don't attest to her address, but do attest to her identity that she would either have or would be capable of getting in fairly short order. And remember, the CEO has the ability to create new identification that would allow her to establish this. For example, he could, I'm not actually saying he will do this, but he could do this if he wanted to, allow that famous prescription bottle to be used that is used in British Columbia. I'm not recommending that necessarily, but it was suggested to us as a possibility. So I think that this is establishing some form of identity is fairly reasonably established. Remember, her sister, using this example, can vouch that she is indeed someone she knows personally. The only people I can imagine falling into the category of where no one knows them personally, I don't think it doesn't say intimately. You'll notice it says personally. The person is not just be introduced to you that day. Where I think I'm struggling, you have to be literally outside your community, and outside your community in a way where you have not established any knowledge because you are an extraordinarily recent arrival, as in within the last few days. Less than a week, I would think. So, I mean, I'm struggling here. I guess one could argue that a homeless person who has just arrived in a municipality has this problem. But don't forget that for all people, and this includes homeless people, there is the option of voting at the returning office, at the advance poll, and at polling day, to say nothing of a number of special balloting opportunities. And these are not easy options to access, I suggest. Nothing is easy for you when you're a homeless person. But the point about them is they are spread out over time chronologically, meaning that you are not likely to be someone who is not known personally to anybody at all, even if you're a homeless person. I suppose if we conjure up, an example of someone who lives in the woods, unknown to other human beings, and emerges on voting day, we have indeed hit somebody who would not qualify to vote under this. But now I want to go back and point out what is fundamentally wrong with Professor Scott's argument, and indeed the entire argument that the opposition has been making from the start. And it is this. Their argument is that the right to vote Section 3 right to vote under the Charter is sacrosanct. And I'm willing to concede that that is true. It is so sacrosanct that if we can find one example, no matter how preposterous, anywhere in the country, we should therefore expect the Supreme Court to overturn every single measure required to ensure that people who are not eligible won't be voting. We have to strip away all security, all potential to avoid fraudulent voting. And I know their argument, their additional argument, that there is no electoral fraud in Canada. None. Zero. Nothing. Nada. Rien. Ever. And they point, I suppose, to the 2011 election where there were no prosecutions, and the 2008 election where there were no prosecutions. But I make the humble suggestion that in a country where many millions of people vote across the country with inadequately trained personnel, we all concede that occurs, with inadequate voters lists, we all concede that, including the CEO, who points out that the voter identification card, or rather the voter information card, has a 14% error rate as to identity, because the voter information card is issued on the basis of the preliminary voters list, not the final voters list, which admittedly is improved. And this rate is over 20% in ridings which he has chosen not to identify to us, that there is indeed, I would argue there is indeed, in some situations, fraudulent voting. We just can't track it. And numerous members of Parliament from all parties, literally all parties, Liberal, NDP, Conservative, Bloc Québécois, when the prior piece of legislation that came before, prior set of amendments to the Elections Act, which came in 2006, when they were dealing with it, they all stated that fraudulent voting was a concern, all of them. So this is the goal, is to strike a reasonable balance. I think that we have gone an extraordinary distance to ensuring that no plausible scenario can exist, as opposed to the implausible. We can always invent something. Another example occurred to me of someone who's kidnapped by aliens and returned to Earth just on Election Day, and their ID is out of date, and or was kept by the aliens. Who knew? Who knows? But no plausible scenario exists in which an individual will be unable to cast a ballot during the writ period, given all of these safeguards that are in place, including the ones that are here, and including the numerous safeguards that have been in existence for some time, such as the existence of advance polls, voting at returning offices, and so on. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Reid. I'll go to Mr. Lekiski and ask for some expedience. I know we're talking about very important
This will be completely expedient, because anything I would have to say after the comparison about aliens coming to vote in Canada would be pale by comparison.
Aliens.
Mr. Lekiski, repetition.
I can't say anything that would top that, so, Chair, I'll just...
I don't know. They keep adding people. Done? Okay, great. No. I meant finished with Mr. Lekiski at the moment, because
that's all we're getting. That's all we're getting from Tom. You can't top that. Oh well.
Right. Mr. Sims.
Thank you.
Some brevity.
Pardon me?
Some brevity.
This is a tall order.
If your chair can ask.
It's a tall order from
you don't have to follow it.
Tall order from a short man. All right. I wanted to, some of the stuff, I'll try to get away from the repetition, because a lot of stuff I want to say was already said by Mr. Scott. And I want to talk about the amendments consequential to, or following this, that obviously will not go through, but the idea about vouching to me was something that was a part of a fundamental of any great democracy that we have in order for people to vote. And I always found it a bit disingenuous when people would say, well, when the government primarily would say, you don't need to show this type of ID just for this, whether it's cross-border shopping or whatever it is you want to do. You know, none of that would prove to be an inalienable right. This is, however, as stated in Section 3 of the Charter. And for that reason, I thought the testimony, and I won't rehash all that was said at testimony, but such compelling evidence, and not only was it compelling, but it was so overwhelmingly of the same opinion. In my 10 years being here, I've never seen more stronger opinion coalesce around one direction since I've been here. I do want to touch on a point, because I don't, again, for the sake of brevity and repetition, I want to stress, though, how I think that in the next election, we are going to have some serious problems and complaints, especially from one segment of the population that I know exists as a majority of my riding, which are seniors. This voter information card has been relegated by the government as something, as a tool that was used to circumvent rules, as whether it was irregularity or fraud. I'll let them decide. But I just found it so egregious to turn their backs on something that was a fundamental piece, a pathway to exercising the democratic right. I remember going to many seniors' homes and asking people to vote for me, but they were talking about voting and all that. And that card was prominent in their rooms, in their houses. It was somewhere where they saw every day, someone that they used. This was a ticket to their own democracy that they exercise. And I think in the next election it will continue to be that. I genuinely hope that by changing this, that there is going to be some program, quite literally, and maybe Elections Canada should do this. I don't know if the government has thought of this, that you should write on this voter information card that in bold letters you cannot use this piece of identification for voting, in bold letters, because we've got problems if that's not done. So I want to reiterate what was said earlier by Professor Scott about the importance of these voter information cards. I know that's repetitive, but I honestly believe it is that important that these VICs remain as important as what they used to be, and if anything, make them stronger. But again, I reiterate, you best tell the Canadian public that this thing is no longer a piece of ID for that third pillar, which is to prove your residence. And I don't understand why they decided to go push ahead, eliminate the element of the population that they have some suspicion of, and try now to reverse engineer mistakes that they think they've made. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Madame Latendresse?
Oui. J'aurais une question pour mes collègues.
I have a question for my colleagues opposite. I don't know whether they are able to answer my question at this point, but as far as what Mr. Scott said a little earlier, and what Mr. Reid said in response to Mr. Scott's comment, when it comes to personally knowing the elector, do we have a definition of what that is to personally know a voter? It's a bit tough for me to understand when one knows another individual personally. What about if you stumble upon someone every day without actually really knowing them? There's no real guide on that that tells you. Will it delay the process in voting centres and polling stations? Will there be questions to the effect that how do you know the person, what's your relationship, etc., etc.? So I want to really know how we're going to know whether two people actually know each other or not.
And attest an oath.
Right. The oath says whether you do or don't.
That's fine as well.
I have an oath saying I know you, and I know that you live in this polling station, and if I'm lying, I am subject to a fairly significant fine. That will be explained to me by the polling official before either the voter or the attester signs and co-signs this oath.
Un peu à ma question, dans le sens où à quel moment.
That responds to the question in part, but when do we determine whether the person has lied because they don't sufficiently know the person personally? What is a lie?
Perhaps, but I know
Non,
who you are.
c'est pour ça, c'est pas la question.
But the question isn't they know the elector, it's they know them personally. So when do you know a person? When do you know a person personally?
problem, or any problem, frankly, as you're trying to suggest it is.
Non, j'essaie pas de dire, j'essaie vraiment d'avoir.
Well, I'm just trying to get a handle on this. It's perhaps my linguistic penchant. I was interested in languages and a linguist before I came here, and I think the definition's a bit abstract, personally speaking.
First off, I would concur in my colleague's remarks. She's absolutely right, and make no mistake, there's going to be problems with this. However, first thing I want to say is that this is not just an ordinary flip-flop. This is a flip-flop of historic proportions. This is a double backflip somersault with a twist in terms of flip-flops. Because, well, before I get to my the first thing I want to say very clearly is that had there been proper consultations in the beginning with all the people that we ultimately heard from who convinced the government through public pressure to change their position, we could have avoided all this if they had simply knocked on the door of the chief electoral officer, the elections commissioner, a few other experts. We could have avoided all of this. And this is what happens when governments bring in legislation that significantly change important things and don't consult with anyone. This is the kind of thing that happens. Let's start at the beginning. The government started, if everyone recalls, talking about this because there was so much fraud. There was so much potential for fraud. In fact, the minister was reading out Mr. Neufeld's report and holding it up and saying, there's the proof, right there, it's in the report. Mr. Neufeld did this study, this expert study, and here's what it said. And what did Mr. Neufeld say when the minister used his report to say that there either was widespread fraud or the potential for widespread fraud? Mr. Neufeld said this, quote, I think any fair-minded person who reads that report would come to the conclusion that he, meaning the minister, has not been fair in his assessment of my findings, end quote. He also went on to say, quote, there was no evidence of fraud whatsoever, end quote. And he also said that he's, quote, only been privy to a handful of cases of voter fraud in his career. And that was the argument. That was the foundation the government laid out for denying vouching. And then, of course, we all heard the ministers, talking points, and they were repeated here for a while. But anybody who's followed this closely kind of saw those talking points soften up just a little, and line by line they sort of disappeared. And as time went on, they stopped defending. And then they went back, and now we're here with this amendment. And it needs to be said, the Prime Minister in particular, and I don't normally mention the Prime Minister at committee level things, but I got to tell you, I sit right across from him, and he's been getting up every day when he has a chance and saying that the NDP has this extreme position that people can vote with no ID. Meanwhile, the vouching available in the last election meant exactly that. People could walk up with no ID, they could get someone to vouch for them, and Mr. Neufeld's report said there was no evidence of fraud whatsoever. So there's nothing extreme about saying that maybe we should use the same vouching system that let the current Prime Minister be elected the Prime Minister.
No idea at all before 2007.
So now it's cute. They've tried. They're not. If you notice, and I'll be shocked if they utter the word vouching. They won't use the word vouching, but that's what this is. They brought it back because they knew they had to. They knew they had to. It was not going to stand. So they tried to find a clever little way to make it look like it's not really vouching, while at the same time they spin out a political message that the NDP has got this extreme position about people voting without ID. Of course, they don't mention the fact that that's exactly how he became Prime Minister, that system was in place, and that the expert that reviewed that election said There was no evidence of fraud whatsoever. So why was this even brought in? Get ready for your tin hat throw-out comment, because this is exactly the sort of thing that the Republicans in the U.S. are doing, and it's about voter suppression. Make no mistake about it. And these little things are throwing in here, like personally and a couple of little factors. This is all meant to hang on to as much of the voter suppression technique, because it works, unfortunately, as possible. And rather than just being upfront, because they have no idea how to be upfront, that's just a foreign concept to them, evidenced by C-23 landing here without even asking the Chief Electoral Officer what he thought. But rather than being upfront and coming in and saying, you know what, we got the vouching thing wrong, we really did, and we're just going to go back to what we had because clearly there's no problem. That's not what's happening. Instead, they refuse to use the word vouching, but that's attestation. Fine, call it whatever you want. It's vouching. Somebody is saying, I know them personally, and I know they live there, and under any definition, that's vouching. So they're trying to be too clever by half. Nobody is going to be fooled. Is this better? Yeah. But make no mistake, it's the bare minimum that they could do facing the avalanche of public criticism they received, not just in Canada, but internationally. And so it would have been a lot easier, again, if you'd done it in the beginning, or even now, to come in and say, you know, we got it wrong. You'd have taken some heat for the flip-flop, but it's the flip-flop with the double twist and the double somersaults, and still trying to come out on top that you didn't go to vouching, but you've still got a little bit of your voter suppression technique in here, because there will be Canadians who otherwise in the last election could have voted who can't this time, because the vouching has been limited. And I have no doubt we'll hear tomorrow the Prime Minister will get back up again and talk about the NDP's extreme position. And I want to emphasize again the extreme position that the Prime Minister is saying that the official opposition has is exactly the system that was in place in the last election that was fair enough to let Prime Minister Stephen Harper get elected, but somehow that's not supposed to be a fair basis to have the next election. Nonsense. Voter suppression. And thank goodness for the integrity and the honesty of our officers of Parliament, current and former, including Madame Fraser, who came forward and said this bill is an attack on our democracy. All those Canadians who came in here knowing how vicious this government is, people are frightened of this government, but they still came down here and they said this is wrong. And thank you to those Canadians that did that. And every Canadian who attended a rally, signed a petition, sent an email, they all contributed to at least getting some of our democracy back that this government was trying to take away in this bill. So our intent, we will be upfront. We intend to vote for this section because it is an improvement, and it does reintroduce vouching as an important positive tool in our electoral system. But we will vote against the clause because at the end of the day, the government is still taking away democratic rights and access to voting that Canadians had in the last election that they will not have in the coming election. And we're going to continue to do everything we can do to get this fully changed. We're not at the end yet, Chair, although I am getting close, but in the process we're not at the end yet. We still have to go through these. It's got to go back to the House, report stage, third reading, so there's still time. There's still time to push them to do all the right thing. But if we can get half a loaf of democracy, which is a shame in Canada that we have to get half a loaf of democracy, we'll take it. But we will continue to persevere so Canadians can have their full loaf of democracy, which they not only deserve, but they had in the last election, and this government's going to take away in the election coming up. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Christopherson. Ms. May, short comment.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chair, because as you know, I have a number of amendments on the same point regarding vouching. My short comment is really in response to some of the argumentation from my friend Scott Reed. In the balancing between the citizens' right to vote and the perfection of the process, in other words, excluding someone who had no right to vote versus the importance of someone who has the right to vote voting, the Supreme Court of Canada was quite clear in the Etobicoke Centre case. I'm not going to make a long point. I'm just going to quote this. This is from page 100 of the majority decision of Rothstein and Moldaver. Quote, "The current system of election administration in Canada is not designed to achieve perfection, but to come as close to the ideal of enfranchising all entitled voters as possible." So as Scott was referring to the balancing, it isn't a level balance. It's not a spirit level. The balance is that the overwhelming priority, the ideal, is to ensure that everyone who's entitled to vote can vote, and that if in the process of achieving that ideal, a few people vote in the wrong place or vote where they weren't entitled to, that's not an issue to the Supreme Court. The issue under the Charter is that every entitled person be allowed to vote. I will, now that Scott Reed is coming back to the table, just remind him how large a part of the Green Party voting base is people who just wandered out of the woods or were abducted by aliens, and I hope he'll be sympathetic in future.
Thank you, Ms. May. Mr. Scott, please. I'd like to finish this section, and we'll take a small break when we get there.
Their deadline, not ours.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. I have two amendments I'd like to propose. As I started saying, I would hope to persuade the government. I'm not sure we have. I think it's important before I table the amendments to realize that hanging over people's heads with vouching, of course, is the potential of being prosecuted. And that's what the oral advice that's referred to in the provision is intended to signal, that the person knows when they vouch for somebody that there is the potential to be prosecuted. That's as it should be, because the system does require that kind of enforcement piece. I understand why the government has that. But if somebody is then told, here's one of the criteria, you have to know the elector personally, otherwise, you know the oral advice I just gave you, you could be prosecuted. My worry is not just the outside alien examples of my friend Scott, it's whether the average person will sort of take a step back and say, okay, well, I can attest to the fact that the elector resides here, but what do you mean by that I know the person personally? They're going to ask the poll clerk or the deputy returning officer or the central poll supervisor, and they're not going to be able to tell them. I mean, Mr. Lukowski, in his answer to Madame La Tendresse, sort of said, well, at one point Tom said, I know who you are, and then said, I know you. Those are two very different things. And so I'm not sure how anybody in the election day system, workers system, will know how to answer that question. You know what the result will likely be? Is that people say, I'm not signing this. You mean you could prosecute me because somebody determines that I don't know them well enough? I've known them for the last 2 weeks. I just moved in next door. Is that enough? I just think that the disincentive potential, when people know that this is a criterion and they can be prosecuted for it, is where we have to see the issue. Now, I think Tom may have laid his hands on a possible solution, because he answered the question by saying it's an attestation. And if we could somehow find a way for this to be rewritten or amended that says you still have to swear this. So that it relies on your own sense of good faith and honor. Do you know this person personally? What does that mean? You swear to that, but this is not part of what you can be prosecuted for. You could be prosecuted if, by chance, somebody was able to prove that you did not know the elector resided in the polling division. It turns out the person did not, and you knew that. That's a much easier thing to prove than whether you knew them personally. And so what I would like to do is move an amendment that would say, please bear with me, Mr. Chair, I'll just, that Bill C-23 be amended in Clause 48 by adding after, and then after Section 143, Sub 3, Sub B, Sub 5. So that means, okay, by adding there 3.1, no one may be prosecuted for any offense under this Act on the sole basis of not having complied with Section 143, 3B2. And that is the provision that says they know the elector personally. It stays as a standard. It taps into the sense that Scott's been talking about, the sense of honor that we prefer to bring, we prefer to think of as what voters bring to our system. It is something that somebody would have to, just like in swearing in court, when they say, I'm going to swear to tell the truth, they would take it seriously enough, the average person, but they would have the protection, but they would have the protection of knowing that on that one thing, they can't be prosecuted for it. Because if what I've just suggested isn't accepted, or a wording that's better, technically better, then I do think you're going to have this huge dissuasion effect for anybody willing to step up and vouch in a fairly wide penumbra, not just aliens landing in tinfoil hats scenario. People are going to say, I don't know that this satisfies knowing a person personally, and I'm not willing to put myself on the line by vouching. And nobody in this polling station can tell me what it means. And no wonder, because it's quite subjective and it's abstract. So that's the amendment I would like to move. I don't know if I've properly worded it in a way that anybody else can improve on, but
working on it.
I can't because I gave it away. Yeah.
A great idea was given to me by a fantastic clerk that we will suspend for a couple of minutes now. I'll say 5 minutes, gives the clerks a chance to look at this and gives us all a little bit about the halfway point for this evening. So suspend for 5 minutes. Please come back at that time. I'm going back to Mr. Scott. He's going to tell us where we're at. And you appear lonely, but please carry on.
I do appear lonely. I'm sans amendement. I wonder if the clerk would do me the favor of reading out the amendment, because I don't have a copy.
Please.
For the benefit of everybody.
That Bill C-23 be amended in clause 48 by adding after section 143(3)B V the following: 3.1. No one may be prosecuted for any offense under this act on the sole basis of not having complied with section 143(3)B II.
Obviously, that provision is the know the elector personally provision. The effect of this would be that the official opposition, we'd be happy is the wrong word, but we would be satisfied to leave that in if it were a normative standard that can't be enforced through prosecution. And it's important for everybody to know that this is not a barren legal beast. I mean, the laws has examples, lots of examples where norms are enforced in different ways. It doesn't make them less legal and legally binding. And in fact, any oath system tends to be like that. It relies ultimately on the honor of the person swearing, because it is so rare that somebody actually is prosecuted for breaching oaths. So in this one, it's just making it super clear so as to prevent this disincentive for people to even vouch, because they worry that they leave themselves open to jeopardy because of how subjective and abstract the idea of knowing a knowing the elector personally is. And so I probably don't have to explain anymore. That's what it's trying to do.
Did you say you had more than one?
I do, but it's only if this doesn't pass, then I'm simply going to move to delete the line.
Very good. All right. I have Mr. Lukiski next on the speaking list, but that was on the main motion. Now it's on the main amendment. Now it's on the amendment to the amendment. Mr. Lukiski?
I'm sorry?
You were on my list for the amendment. Mr. Scott has now made an amendment to the amendment, and
yes.
You want to be on that spot?
No, I was just, my hand was up to speak.
To the main?
To the main motion after I heard David go on to his little rant again. But are you trying to speak to Craig's amendment now?
Yes, I am now. That's
No.
what we're on, is the amendment.
No.
No. Anyone on that? No? Okay, let's vote on the amendment. Recorded vote on Craig 2. Yeah. Please.
Mr. Scott? Mr. Christopherson?
Yes.
Madame La Tendresse?
Oui.
Mr. Sims? Mr. Lukiski?
No.
Mr. Wallace?
Oh, no.
Mr. Opitz?
No.
Mr. Reid?
No.
Mr. Richards?
No.
Defeated.
It's defeated. Now we're back to the amendment. Government 5. I have Mr. Lukiski first on that list.
Yeah, and I'll be very brief as opposed to my colleague, Mr. Christopherson. I won't play up to the cameras, but I will point out a couple of things that he tries to continuously
Not helpful,
characterize.
gentlemen. Go ahead.
One is that the NDP position, let's be quite clear, is that they are in favor of people with absolutely no identification being able to vote. That is simply not the intent of this bill, nor will it ever be. And in fact, even though he tries to characterize the government's amendment, G5, as being a monumental climb down, I would point out to him that 87% of Canadians polled agree with us that you should have some form of identification before you're able to vote. So this continued discussion and the continued mischaracterization that all of Canadians agree with the NDP and the opposition's position on vouching is absolutely inaccurate. They disagree, and they disagree greatly. So let's get that out on the table, Mr. Chair. Secondly, what we are attempting to achieve with this amendment is not a form of vouching, because vouching merely means you can vote without identification. You have to have ID. Everybody who votes in an election when the Fair Elections Act is adopted will have to show some form of identification. Pure and simple, as opposed to the NDP's position where no ID is needed. Now, David, I know you want to try and get camera time again, but it's my turn to speak. I'd ask you for your consideration. All right, so...
Then I'll give you a clear vein. I didn't take shots at you personally.
Again, David, I know you want the camera time. You've had 12 minutes before. It's my turn.
Come on, you can come up with better lines than that.
Gentlemen.
That's the best you got in schoolyard stuff?
I mean, the NDP is absolutely, Mr. Chair, thrown off their game when they saw that Ipsos Reid poll that shows 87% of the people believe in our position. They do not believe that Canadians should be allowed to vote without producing any identification. That is what Canadians feel. This reflects that, because now to be able to vote, even if you can't prove residency or you don't have identification for residency, you can do it by signing an oath. And having a co-signer sign an oath that testifies, I know this person, I know where this person lives. That is what Canadians want to see. That's what's reflected in C-23. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Richards, let's try and bring this one somewhere near the end sometime in our lifetimes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to be brief as well. Mr. Lukuski made some of the comments I wanted to make. I mean, certainly no question, despite the claims of the opposition, this is not something that is simply held by the Prime Minister or even his caucus. This is something that 87% of Canadians believe it is very reasonable that someone show identification in order to prove who they are in order to vote. Now, they also point out concerns, or claim to have concerns about some of the points in this particular amendment when we talk about knowing the elector personally. In order to, because I want to be clear, what we're talking about here is the ability for someone to prove who they are, and then because for various reasons, it may be that the box number is what's on their ID or other reasons, to be able to attest as to their residence. It's what we're doing here is obviously an amendment that would allow for sort of a double oath, a co-sign of an oath, where they're signing an oath attesting that they are in fact qualified to vote, and that they do live at the residence that they say they do. They would find, of course, another qualified elector who has voted with the proper identification to co-sign that oath with them. So it's a double, and of course the penalties are made quite clear. They are significant, so that Canadians can be confident that the person is actually residing where they're claiming that they are and where they're co-signer of their oath. Now, the one concern that was brought forward by the opposition was this idea of somehow that an oath and the fact that one of the conditions was, of course, knowing the elector personally. They seem to have some concerns about that. I might turn to our experts and ask them some questions, because, and I'll just sort of ask a series, and you can just kind of respond at the end, because obviously the taking of an oath is quite a fairly well-known and common practice within our society. This is something that is done quite commonly when signing legal documents, for example, when someone is served a legal document, for example. I know I've personally witnessed this practice. It's very common, and one of the things that you're attesting to when you sign an oath is you are always attesting that you do in fact know the person personally. That's a fairly commonly known thing within society, that in an oath, that is one of the, and usually when we're talking about legal documents where you're signing an oath, one of the things is, of course, the person is of the full age of 18, so they're, of course, able to sign a document. That's one of the things here. Of course, that would apply in the case of an election as well. Obviously, to be qualified to be an elector, they would have to be of the full age of 18 or older. And so in this amendment, there's a couple of things here that are quite germane to signing the oath, co-signing the oath with a person. One is obviously knowing them personally. The other one is knowing that they reside in the polling division, because that's obviously what they're signing the oath to attest to, that they know the person, that they know they are resident in the polling, because that's what we're signing the oath for, is to prove their residence within the polling division that they're seeking to vote in. But in terms of dealing with the oath itself, I guess I would ask first if you could confirm for me that that is a fairly common practice, and it's fairly well known within law what an oath entails and what it means, and that that the sort of the provision in there of knowing the person personally is something that is quite clearly understood, I think, in law. And if you could sort of confirm to me what the penalties are for falsely signing that oath. And then also I just would point out as well that if we look at Government Amendment 6, which indicates, should it be passed, talks about the new section that would be 143(1) sub 1, and talking about, in fact, the oath itself that would be in this provision. And it indicates, much like in the current section 143(1) in the Act,
6, so do you mean 5?
No, I'm actually I'm skipping ahead for the purposes of
Just wanted
discussion
to make
and
sure.
debate. Yes, thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for clarifying that. But I am skipping ahead to that simply because it would obviously indicate that if it was passed, what it says is that when the person is signing the oath, that the person working at the polling station would orally advise the oath taker of the qualifications for electors, and then it goes on to talk about the penalties. So obviously, when it talks about knowing someone personally, I think it would indicate there, although it is quite clearly known in law what that means, it would also obviously indicate that the person is, because they're saying that they're aware of the qualifications in order to vote, they're obviously going to be indicating that they know the person well enough in order to know they are qualified to be an elector. So they would obviously know that they're of the age of 18, that they're a citizen, so that they're able to, they meet all the qualifications in order to vote. So I've sort of asked a series of questions with some explanation, but what I'm really wanting to know is, is in fact, the signing of an oath something that is quite common in society, and then the idea of knowing someone personally when you're signing that oath is something that's fairly well established and commonly known, what that in fact means, what the penalties are for falsely signing an oath, and thirdly, when we look at Government Amendment 6, talking about the fact that they're explaining what the qualifications for electors are, would obviously indicate that they're signing that they're of the full knowledge that this person is in fact qualified to be an elector. That would be what they would essentially mean to know them personally. Would that be accurate?
So we'll try to answer some of those questions in order. If you look at Government 5, so sub B that's being proposed, it essentially says that they're attesting to the elector's residence on oath in writing in the prescribed form, and then sets out some elements that have to be part of that prescribed form. So essentially part of what you're swearing an oath to. And then it sets out those elements, one of which is that they know the elector personally. So essentially it's saying, that they're swearing that they know the elector personally as well as where they live, which is essentially the purpose of what that attestation is for. And then the offense for a false oath is set out later in the Act. And false oaths, well, the taking of oaths is actually quite, I wouldn't say quite common in the Act, but you see it multiple times in terms of how it's used to prove something. So that offense already exists in the Canada Elections Act as it is now. The punishments that fall for it are being increased under the Fair Elections Act. So the maximum punishments would be, it can be proceeded with on either summary conviction or indictment. For summary conviction, the maximum punishment would be $20,000 in fines, as well as an imprisonment of not more than 1 year. A conviction on indictment, which is a very serious criminal offense, would be a fine of not more than $50,000 and imprisonment of a term of not more than 5 years, or both. So in terms of a false oath, in order to prosecute for something like that, the person would have to have knowingly signed that false oath. So they would have knowingly felt that they did not know that elector personally. They would have knowingly thought that that elector did not reside where they were testing that they resided to. So it's a threshold that would have to be met.
Okay, thank you. So I think it's quite clear that knowing someone in this case would be obviously knowing that they're in fact qualified to be an elector. So you'd know them well enough to know that they're 18 years of age, know them well enough to know that they're in fact a citizen, they're qualified to vote. And obviously it also indicates that they're qualified to to vote because they do reside in the polling division that you're saying that they reside in. They've also signed to attest to that themselves, so it's a co-signing thing. So the thing here with this, amendment, essentially what we're doing, we're ensuring that the principle that Canadians, the vast majority of Canadians, obviously quite strongly believe that you must prove who you are. This is where the NDP is completely out of step with the vast majority of Canadians in this principle, without question, in taking the position that they do, that you shouldn't have to prove who you are in order to vote. 87% of Canadians have been quite clear they expect that. That's still expected under this act with this amendment. But what is allowed, of course, is for you to co-sign. It's quite clear that someone would know the person personally, know that they reside in the polling division, and that they're qualified to vote. So that is what, in fact, would be happening here. I think that is something that obviously has the full support of Canadians, and I would ask the NDP to come along and come along with what Canadians expect and support those Canadians that expect that, and it's a very reasonable expectation.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. I had no one on my speaking list. I now have Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move the follow-up amendment. But I also think it's important, just for clarity, to know that when Mr. Lukowski refers to the Ipsos Reid poll, saying that people, 86% of people believe that you, well, the one I have says 86, so I'll give it to you, 87. 87% even say that you must have ID to vote. In fact, the question asked was, and 86% agree, quote, that requiring voters to personally prove who they are and where they live is essential. That was the concept they were asked. It's a very different thing from ID. Vouching is one method of proving who you are. And the same poll said that 52% agree that the elimination of vouching will unfairly take the vote away from people like students and the poor, unquote. So it's absolutely impossible for the people, absolutely impossible for the people in the 87% to actually believe that this is about, the question they were asked is about whether you have ID. The question was proving who you are. And no wonder people reasonably thought, 87% reasonably thought proving who they are and where they live is essential. So I think that's a fairly important correction. So the amendment that I'd like to move, Mr. Chair, is a short one, that Bill C-23 be amended in Clause 48 by replacing the line, quote, 143 sub 3 sub B sub 2, our friend, they know the elector personally, end of quote, with 143 sub 3 sub B 2, they know the elector, end of quote, in Amendment G 5. So this would eliminate the word personally. Since we've lost on the other amendment, I'd like to again give the government a chance. This is much closer to the kinds of examples that even Mr. Richards was just giving. I hope the government would come halfway by understanding our argument about why the word personally is superfluous, especially when the examples being given by Mr. Richards included, do you know the person well enough to know where they live, which is the second, is already there as a criterion. And so if we eliminate the word personally, I honestly think we have something resembling a fair meeting of minds. I don't think the concerns we've been presenting have been unreasonable. In a context in which the government has yet to vote in favor of a single opposition motion, I would really welcome some support on this one, and so I hereby move that.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. So on that addition to the amendment, or an amendment to the amendment, Mr. Sims?
Yeah, equally short on the issue. I think Mr. Scott brings up a very good point, and congratulate him for doing that, because I think that including that word does create an onus on the individual that they may feel is just not attainable, when in fact it is pure disenfranchisement. And I think what he's done here is made a pretty reasonable amendment. So I think we should all vote for this.
Mr. Scott.
And I'd like to actually attribute the suggestion to my colleague Alexandrine Antandres. Because I might have skipped to something more desperate. I think this is a much better solution.
Well, there you have it. It's a birthday gift to all Canadians.
Yes. There we go. Yeah, they're here.
Come on, never mind the cake. Give us some legislation. Give us some democracy.
Whenever you mention cake, we're getting in trouble. So let's go on that one then. Probably a recorded vote then on the amendment to G5.
Mr. Scott?
Yes.
Mr. Christopherson?
Yes.
Madame La Tendresse? Oui. Mr. Sims?
Yes.
Mr. Lukiski?
No.
Mr. Wallace?
No.
Mr. Opitz? Mr. Reed?
Nothing.
Mr. Richards? No. Defeated.
It is defeated. We're now at G5. A final amendment.
Yeah. And I won't, there's no preface.
Security of the majority.
There's no preface. We know where we've ended up. That Bill C-23 be amended in Clause 48 by deleting subsection 143, sub 3, sub B, sub 2, as set out in Amendment G5. And a recorded vote, please.
Seeing no speakers to it, let's do the vote then.
Mr. Scott?
Yes.
Mr. Christopherson?
Oui.
Madame La Tendresse? Oui. Mr. Sims?
Yes.
Mr. Lukiski?
In the immortal words of my colleague, Mr. Deepak Obri, our position has not changed. No.
Mr. Wallace? Mr. Opitz? Mr. Reed?
No.
Mr. Richards?
No.
Defeated.
It is defeated. On G5. Calling the vote on G5. Sorry? A recorded vote. Thank you.
Mr. Scott?
Yes, under some protest.
Mr. Christopherson?
Yes.
Madame La Tendresse? Oui. Mr. Sims?
Yes.
Oh, come on, show some
Mr.
enthusiasm.
Lukiski?
Yes, enthusiasm.
Well, I was blinded by the teeth there for a second.
Mr. Wallace?
Yes.
Mr. Opitz?
Yes.
Mr. Reed?
An enthusiastic yes.
Mr. Richards?
Absolutely.
G5 carries. So now, what am I going to next? If G5 is adopted, NDP 30, Liberal 18, and PV 29, and NDP 31, and NDP 32 cannot be proceeded with. So now go to NDP 27. Catch me when I get to each of those.
So NDP, I'd like to move this, Mr. Chair. Thank you. And on NDP 27, page 25, we've now moved on to the voter information cards now that we've restored a form of vouching by address. And the voter information card is what this clause seeks to reestablish in a limited sense, because it seeks to give the Chief Electoral Officer back the very power he already has by saying the Chief Electoral Officer may authorize as a piece of identification for the purpose of establishing the elector's address and notice of confirmation, a registration that is sent under Section 95 or 102. That's the Act's way of talking about the voter information card. And let's not talk about the technicalities. That's what it intends to do. And voter information cards, as everybody is well aware, are cards that are produced through the intersection of multiple databases that the Elections Canada has access to, including the driver's licenses in every province. So they automatically include whatever level of accuracy exists in those databases. Tax records, citizenship records, the list goes on. And so it's no wonder that the Chief Electoral Officer testified that, in his view, it is likely that the voter information card is more accurate than driver's licenses.
Right.
And one of the reasons we should think about the problem of driver's licenses is that Elections Canada has an active, proactive approach to updating its list. It's not an enumeration approach anymore. It's doing what it can to keep lists current. Whatever gaps do occur, and obviously in a mobile world will occur as people move. A lot of driver's licenses these days, at least in Ontario, the time period on them are at minimum 5 years, if not longer. People move around, and I can tell from experience, this is my time for anecdotes. We've heard lots of anecdotes in the last 2 months from colleagues on the other side. This is my anecdote, which is I have quite a few friends who will confess to, although I won't name them, will confess to having a driver's license and driving on it even after they've moved their address. And they may not have got around to notifying the authorities, and I think that's not an uncommon thing. So driver's licenses, there will be lags. Now, this is not on purpose. These people were not planning to break the law. They were just taking a little bit extra time. Just an example of why driver's licenses, although it's the gold standard in the system, because if you have one, because it also has your address and it's listed as that kind of photo ID plus address plus name, you can vote with it alone. The voter information card list already builds in the driver's licenses. The second point I need to make very clear is that in the last election, a major pilot project, and we heard about it, was pilot is even the wrong word. A major authorization was given by the Chief Electoral Officer for somewhere around 900,000 people to be able to use the VIX in 3 or 4 situations: Aboriginal reserves, college and university campuses, long-term convalescent homes, and seniors' residences. And indeed, this is what happened, and in different contexts, a large percentage of those authorized to use the VIX did indeed use them. The report was it sped up and simplified the process greatly. The report's back. And what it allows you to do is not to vote just with the VIC. You're supposed to be bringing another piece of ID that's in this list, this famous list. Mr. Chair, do you remember how many are on this list?
I can only guess 39.
Oh, I think you might be right, Mr. Chair. Yeah. Yeah.
Memory of an elephant.
That's right.
One of us has to pay attention to all the witnesses.
There we are. There we are.
Alphabetically.
So as long as you have one of the authorized 39 pieces and the VIC, which was primarily authorized to show address, then you could vote. One of the reasons for the project was that, in fact, the requirements for the new ID requirements only entered into force after amendments in 2006-2007 to the Canada Elections Act, before which there actually was pretty much a trust-based system of voting in this country in terms of ID not being necessary. What it did do is it produced enough evidence that people were not voting, not even going to the voting stations, because they were either confused or couldn't find the pieces of ID to put together. And it was decided that the VIC, which already existed as a notification of registration, could be used and authorized as a form of identification for this purpose. And it worked as a major initiative. It led to, didn't lead directly to, but in Mr. Neufeld's report, he had 2 corresponding recommendations. He had a bunch of recommendations about how to deal with irregularities, including better training and recruiting. But he ultimately said that one of the other goals should be to reduce the amount of vouching needed. Not to get rid of vouching, but to reduce the need. And one way to do that is to increase the availability of the VIC as a second piece of ID to show address. And indeed, that led to the Chief Electoral Officer saying, "It is indeed my intention to authorize the use of voter information cards in the next general election." Perhaps completely unrelated to that, C-23 was tabled in the House of Commons and eliminated the ability of the Chief Electoral Officer to authorize VICs, not just in the case of the 900,000 who were able to in 2011, but every Canadian who would have been able to use it in 2015. Last point is anyway, I'll ignore that one. The last point is that sorry, Tom took me back surprise. I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah.
Rob Ford?
Yeah. Yeah. The last point is that one of the kind of the anecdotal characters in the last 2 months has been the multiplying VIC, the VIC that ending up in somebody's hands with their name in more than one way, with the formal possibility being suggested that that person could thereby try to vote multiple times. Another scenario, another character has been the VIC that travels in groups in lobbies of residences and is picked up and somehow or other in the fictional imagination of one Conservative MP is then distributable to others who can then vote with them. Problem with this scenario, these scenarios, apart from there being no evidence it ever occurs along those lines, is that you need a second piece of ID to vote with it. You need to produce the ID that shows your name, your identity, that then gets used with the VIC. You would have to be motivated not just to say, I can vote with this VIC, and I'm not going to vote on my own name. You'd have to be that kind of person too, because you're not going to show up at the same polling station and vote twice under different names. So the VIC would have to have been sent or get in the hands of somebody who otherwise can't vote or doesn't want to vote in their own name. And then you'd have to be motivated to forge the second piece of ID. Not likely. And so therefore, it's not that surprising that the minister in the House on, I believe it was Monday, giving all the examples to back up his claim that multiple people receiving multiple VICs voting multiple times could not be backed up by virtue of the fact that the only two examples he continues to be able to give is of a satire show, Infoman, charting two people who ostensibly tried to vote with two VICs, but you know what? Could not. And I won't go into the details about why they could not. So there, in fact, are no examples available to the minister of examples of people using VICs fraudulently. And yet, we have a proposal by the government to get rid of probably the most accurate, certainly the most accurate piece of federal ID as one piece of ID that can be used in tandem with another. It cannot be used on its own according to the current system. And so all this is an attempt to return the law to where it was. And also, I hope to avoid huge chaos in 2015 when all the people who were first introduced to the fact they could formally use VICs as part of their voting now have to be reprogrammed to make sure they do not try to vote in that way this time, and instead look for other pieces of ID, which many of them will be able to find with different degrees of effort, but certainly, let's say at least in the thousands, will not. So I'd like to move this NDP 27 to achieve the return of voter information cards as something the Chief Electoral Officer may authorize. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to speak against this motion. As I've pointed out on a number of occasions in the past, notwithstanding the strange claim that this is the most accurate piece of identification in the Canadian arsenal of identification, The reality is that the Chief Electoral Officer in his own report following the last election observed that there was a 14% error rate as to addresses in the voter information card. He indicated there was about a 10% error rate as to identity. So 1 in 10 person was just done as the wrong person. He also indicated that there was over a 20% error rate in 10 constituencies across the country. He did not specify which those constituencies were, but in the past we've seen that in Trinity Spadana, to take one example, where there was a special investigation subsequent to the 2006 election. You had literally thousands of people who had to be dealt with and signed on election day because they weren't on the voters list. Remember, the voter information card is by definition only as good as the voters list. And what the CEO seems reluctant to state, but it's a fact, is that the voter information card comes from the preliminary voters list, not the final voters list, which actually is more accurate. But the voter information card, if it's used as information, you know, something that tells me you should go vote at this poll that has 80% chance of being right is, frankly, I don't think that's that good, but it's 80% chance of being right as to where I should go to vote. That's the information function. An identification function. And what if your driver's license, you know, in certain parts of the country had a 20% chance of identifying you not as Joe Preston, but as some other person? And some other person is Joe Preston, not you. You might be upset when you learn that you have had your driver's license revoked and your ability to drive revoked because somebody else was caught driving under the influence, 1 time in 5. That's pretty significant. So the voter information card was never intended to serve this purpose. The CEO conducted a series of experiments in its use as a kind of identification in a number of locations. He said on Aboriginal reserves, not all Aboriginal reserves in Canada, but some of them, quite a large number, in some seniors' residences, long-care residence facilities, and finally on campus. He reported considerable success in 2 of the 3 locations. The success rate was very low for students, but it was interesting how he calculated his results to give the illusion that they achieved greater success than they actually did. He said, here's the number of people who turned up to vote among these groups that we were testing who carried the voter card with them. Right? That does not mean that X% of these people, of the potential voters, were identified using this card. What it means is that of those who actually turned up to vote, X% brought it with them. And I can't remember the exact numbers. It was in the 70 to 80% range, I believe, for the first 2 named groups. It was much lower for students. Now, if you take another instrument, survey instrument that was done by the CEO, this is the study of youth voters and why youth do not participate. Lack of a voter information card was cited by 3 of the 5 subgroups of young people who were not voting as a reason why they don't vote. So the voter information card is only useful for those who get it. There's a high error rate where those who are getting it are not actually getting a correct card. Others are not getting it at all. They don't seem to be included at all in the CEO's statistics. Yet another frustration for us as the de facto board of directors trying to watch the professional management of Elections Canada when we get these statistics that are denying us information that seem to be designed as much to hide that agency's incompetence as to reveal what it's doing. In short, Mr. Chair, I was alarmed to learn that the CEO was expanding, intending to expand this from this experiment to the entire country, and I am relieved that that option no longer exists. And on that basis, I'll be voting against this this proposed change.
Thank you, Mr. Reid. Mr. Christopherson.
Thank you, Chair. First off, again, had we had proper consultations and done this in a fair and open way, I think one of the key recommendations we'd be looking at in a new bill would be to go back to enumeration which would eliminate a whole lot of the problems that we've got. It worked. It was cumbersome. It cost a bit. I don't know how much more it cost than the cost of maintaining the list that we do now, but it worked. It worked. And in many ways, it worked better. But we're nowhere near that. I mean, again, we're just defending the best things that we can and trying to amend some of the most damaging parts of all this. But we missed another opportunity to really improve our system by asking Canadians and experts about the idea of going back to enumeration. I think that would have been in front of us. Having said that, I'm also disappointed to hear the government again, showing such disrespect to an officer of Parliament, to make the statement that an officer of Parliament did something to give the illusion of some kind of false conclusion. You imagine what would happen if anybody came in here and said something like that about the Prime Minister or even a minister? People would have gone crazy if they had, well, okay.
Gentlemen, let's just give your thoughts not to each other.
It's more fun.
No, I understand. For some of you, it may be more fun. For one person in this room, it is not. So,
doesn't majority rule?
No.
No, I didn't think so. All right, look, the fact is that I considered it entirely totally disrespectful, and I don't think they would have done that to anybody in a uniform or anybody with a fancy title except somebody they don't like. And then all their saluting and respect and honor, and that's who we are, that all goes by the wayside as they treat someone like the Chief Electoral Officer with such disrespect. Now, what did that CEO, and I expect the government to tune out because they don't care what the Chief Electoral Officer has to say, otherwise they would have asked him what he thought before they wrote the bill. But here's what he said when we brought him in and forced the government to inject some democracy into this process. Quote, "In fact, with an accuracy rate of 90%, the VIC, the voter information card, is likely the most accurate and widely available government document. The VIC is based on regular updates from driver's license bureaus, the Canada Revenue Agency, Citizenship and Immigration Canada, and various other authoritative sources. During the election period, revision activities at the local level also increased the accuracy of the VIC, contrary to what the government suggests. This likely makes it a more current document than even the driver's license, which is authorized by law and used by the vast majority of voters. The legislation, well, before I do that, I want to just pause for a moment there, and I'll come back to that quote. It's short, Chair. The government went nuts all through this whole process whenever we called it a voter identity card. They insisted it's got to be a voter information card. And yet, all the evidence we had, Chair, all the evidence, including the quote I just gave from someone who is an officer of Parliament. So unless one of the government members want to say he's lying, I'm prepared to accept that as a fact, that it's got a 90% accuracy, and it's more accurate than any individual government document. Why? Because the voter information card is derived from all the databases. So any one of your precious 39 pieces of ID are not as good as the voter information card that has access to all those government databases. Hence the position of the Chief Electoral Officer that the voter information card is 90% accurate and likely the most accurate and widely available government document. So again, if the government was really interested in having more people vote to increase the number of voters, then you would make it easier by accepting the voter which is not one that made this up to hold something, the voter information card. It's already mailed out. It's got the address. People know that they should get the change made if they want to vote, and they do, and that's why Mr. Mayran had said that the revised list is even more accurate. To continue Mr. Mayran's quote, and it is short, Chair. The legislation authorizes Elections Canada to establish the list of acceptable forms of identification. Following the first election where the new identification rules were in place, we did a test, and we used the voter information card in some very specific places, such as reserves, shelters, long-term care facilities, and student residences. If I may again, interestingly, that was some of the most compelling testimony we heard was from individuals and organizations representing Canadians described in that sentence in terms of where they live. To continue, quoting the Chief Electoral Officer of Canada, evaluations showed that almost 68% of those people used the voter information cards. We found no indication of fraud or other offenses, and people told us, including the administrators of shelters and long-term care facilities, that the cards made voting easier. That's the last thing this government wants to hear, because their whole goal is to suppress that vote, to have as few Canadians as possible go out and vote so that their targeted system will give them another majority. The last sentence in the quote is that voters and administrators appreciated it. End quote. I'm not aware, well, we had one, I'll give you that, but I think that was on vouching, not the voter information card per se. But I give the government one. There was no one else that came in and supported the government position on voter information cards. Make no mistake, having the voter information card become a voter identification card is, number one, the most accurate, number two, it's the easiest to use, and three, it would likely lead to more Canadians voting. So why doesn't this bill do that? Answer, because they want fewer Canadians to vote. They've got such a highly technical laser beam system that they know that if they can just keep everybody, they can ram this through, and it's not unlike what they're doing in the United States, the Republicans and their ID laws that are being challenged all the way to their Supreme Court. That's where all this is coming from. That's why, if anybody wonders why the government's defying political gravity, doing something that nobody supports, it's because it does meet their partisan objective. So, my last point is this. People are going to walk in, Chair. On Election Day, they're going to walk into their home. They're going to make sure that they grab their voter identification card, and there's going to be a whole lot of people, especially if it's a nice day and voting is, within a couple of blocks, and they're going to grab the card, and they're going to head out, and they're going to go and vote. And they're going to show up in the voting station, and they're going to say, there's my voter information card, and oh yeah, there's my name on the list right there, so I'm all set to vote. And they're not going to be allowed to vote unless they've got ID. Government's going to say, well, all they have to do is go back home 2 blocks and come back. True. But we all know human nature. We know how hard it is to get people to go out and vote once, never mind go back to the polling station again if they've been refused, because they're going to be so frustrated standing there saying, wait a minute, I've got a card from Elections Canada that has my name and it's accurate, has my address and it's accurate, and I'm standing here in the voting station where I should be, I can see my name on the list, and you're telling me I can't vote? So make no mistake, voter suppression, is any one of these going to tip the election and hand them a frauded election? No. But every one of these changes incrementally has the effect of having just a little bit less turnout across the country, and that's what they want. That's what the American Republicans want, and that's what the Canadian Conservative Party want, and that's why this is here, notwithstanding every expert saying that the best thing to do to improve our election system and to increase the opportunity and the likelihood that people will vote is to turn the voter information card into a voter identification card and let people vote with that. Thank you, Chair.
I have Mr. Richards next, and then Mr. Reid, who would like to vote on this during my lifetime.
Okay.
Here, here.
I will try to keep it very brief then, Mr. Chair. I had just a few points I wanted to make, and I don't think I need to go over. Mr. Reid actually did cover quite well when we talk about the accuracy of the voter information card in order to be used as identification. I mean, 1 in 6 or more are you know, sort of there's errors with 1 in 6 or more of the cards. We don't have to go over that ground again. That's quite clear, despite whatever the opposition wants to try to claim about its accuracy. It's, you know, that certainly is a troublesome rate of error, and one that I think, you know, does create some concern. The other point I'd like to go over, and I won't conjure up the specter of alien abductions again, like my colleague Mr. Reid did, but yeah, it certainly was a good, you know, entertaining example. What I think it did though was when he was discussing that, he was alluding to the fact that, you know, he was finding it difficult, as much as I was, to imagine as we went through the hearings, someone who would not be able to in fact provide the identification required. And I did note that throughout the hearings, we never, in fact, did hear from a single witness who had indicated that they or anyone they knew had ever, that they were aware of anyone that they knew who would not have been able to vote under the provisions in this bill. There was a lot of hypothetical examples given, but there was never any concrete example given. And the opposition likes to talk a lot about concrete examples. Well, we never did hear a single concrete example of a voter who would not have been able to have voted, who could not have actually got the ID required within an election period in order to be able to vote. And it's something I find hard to imagine. And having said that, you know, obviously there's been an amendment that we've just made here to allow someone to co-sign an oath as to their residence. You know, that one I could, you know, see as quite a reasonable amendment. But, you know, in terms of this card, obviously, first of all, the fact that I've just stated that, you know, we did not hear from anyone who, outside of hypothetical examples, indicated that there would have been any trouble to be able to produce the ID required, especially now given the fact that there can be co-signed an oath as to attest to their residence. And furthermore, the voter information card itself, because of the fact that it's actually mailed to their address, to the last known address, all the examples that were given, the hypothetical examples I should point out as well that were given, it wouldn't apply to those examples. So, you know, we heard about an example of a homeless person who obviously wouldn't have anything that would come in the mail. Well, certainly the voter information card would apply in that case. It wouldn't be able to receive that in the mail either if you don't have anywhere to receive your mail. You know, to the student who is, you know, at an educational institution away from their parents' home and yet receives all their mail at their parents' home, but is choosing to vote in the polling division in which they're going to school. Again, their voter information card would then, if all their mail is going there, it would come there. So I don't see how it would solve the issue if in fact one existed, which we certainly didn't have established to us. Of course, I've already identified you know, the accuracy rate concerns, and then, you know, as to some of the other claims of the opposition, you know, there was sort of this indication that somehow people, you know, we should be prepared for all these people to show up at the polls with nothing but their voter information card next election. Well, I would also point out that one of the other provisions in Bill C-23 is to better require Elections Canada to advertise the logistics of voting. And that includes, obviously, things like what identification to bring. And we had many witnesses who came before this committee who indicated they were not aware of what they needed to bring in order to vote. In fact, we're quite surprised to learn that some of the possibilities that were available to them. That obviously indicates that there needs to be a better job done of that. That is something that this bill requires, something that we would expect Elections Canada to undertake. Therefore, people would be aware of exactly what would be required in order to vote. So I think that certainly that, to me, indicates that there's not a necessity for the voter information card to be used as a piece of identification. And in fact, what's in Bill C-23 and including the amendment that we've just made would facilitate every voter who wishes to vote to be able to vote in our elections.
Mr. Reid?
I'll just point out again, in addition to pointing out the statistical problems with the voter identification, the voter information card as a form of identification, I'll just point out again 2 stories from my own personal experience. The first was when I received 3 voter information cards to me when I was living in a house on my own, one to Scott Reid, one to Jeffrey Reid, and one to Scott Jeffrey Reid. That indicates a problem with the list, voters list. And a second example, when myself and my ex-wife, this was back when we were married, that's a while ago because we split up a year ago, but we received 2 voter cards, one for her, one for me, telling us to vote in 2 different constituencies. And that happened because of the way Elections Canada treated our address, the way she'd written it down, as being at rural Route 1 Carleton Place in one riding. And the way I'd written the address down, it was the street address, Mississippi Mills, Ontario, which is in a different riding. It just happens the house is close to the riding boundary. But, you know, the example that Mr. Christopherson offers is the person takes the card and goes down and votes what they're legally permitted to do. One of us would have been voting illegally by following the advice on the card. The card was just wrong. So, you know, this is all encapsulated in that error rate, that 14% error rate I mentioned, as to people's addresses. And this is a pretty significant point. This is simply, I could go on. I also mentioned the example of an assistant I have who received a voter information card addressed to somebody else in his house, took it down to the polling station simply as a way of finding his way to the polling station. Presumably the address, the person living at that address ought to go to this place, but the card was issued on the assumption that the previous residents still lived there, etc., etc. These examples are so widespread that the claim that is made that this is somehow Canada's most accurate piece of ID is either it's wrong or else we have no ID in this country that's actually accurate. So they're one or the other.
Thank you, Mr. Reid. Mr. Sims now.
I just have a quick question, if I may, for Mr. Richards. And he talked about advertising the who or what and when and that business. If Elections Canada were to advertise to Canadians that they are no longer allowed to use a VIC, is that okay?
The provision would, the provision obviously indicates that they're to indicate to them what they should bring in order to vote. So I would think that what they should probably do is try to focus their efforts on ensuring people know the information they need in order to vote, which would be, here's what you should bring. I would think that would be what they should try to focus on. But as to that, it's the best I could answer that question. Is I think that what they should do is focus on the positives of what they should bring.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. Done. Calling the question on 27, NDP 27. High-level discussions. Hang on just 1 second. Okay. NDP 27. All those in favor? Recorded vote on NDP 27.
Mr. Scott? Mr. Christopherson?
Yes.
Madame la Tendresse?
Oui.
Mr. Sims?
Yes.
Mr. Lukiski?
No.
Mr. Wallace?
No.
Mr. Opitz?
No.
Mr. Reid?
No.
Mr. Richards?
No.
Defeated.
It is defeated. We now move on to NDP 28.
I'll move this. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will be as brief as I can. This is a bit of an offer. Well, no, it's a request to the government. So we now have in the Act the current provision where you can vote with a single piece of government-issued ID that has photo, name, and address. You can vote with 2 pieces of ID that collectively show your name and address. You can now vote with this new vouching ID plus vouching of address. And that would have been the sort of the trilogy we had before, with a form of vouching, new form of vouching, different from before. This is suggesting adding a 4th possibility. And I'll tell you why I'm suggesting it, but I'll read it first. That it would be a written declaration made and signed by the elector as to his or her address, and 1 piece of identification of a type authorized by the Chief Electoral Officer other than a notice of confirmation of registration sent under Section 95 or 102, which establishes the elector's name. So in English, that is a written declaration would be in place of or an option ahead of, I'm going to think of it ahead of vouching of address. And the piece of ID would be as it existed in the government's GC5, whatever that was. Government 5, G5. But I've, of course, excluded the voter information card as being one of the pieces of ID. It's assumed for 2 reasons. One, it's primarily valuable for address anyway, and even if we had won the earlier vote, this exclusion would still have made sense. At the same time, it now is necessary because we're not restoring the voter information card. The reason I would ask the government to consider this is that it still involves, this will link up with the same punitive provision as the government's oath. It's the same, swearing an oath can still be punished, but it's much cleaner than vouching, and it almost certainly will enfranchise a lot more people, and boy will it help at the in the polling stations, because you're not having 2 people having each to sign things. You're not having all of the more cumbersome side of that. And people who cannot find another person to vouch in their polling division, keep in mind it has to be in your polling division, which narrows the range a bit, can simply swear the declaration. It goes into the record and it can be tracked down, and if you don't, if in any sense you've misrepresented yourself, you're subject to the same penalties as would be the case under the partial vouching or vouching by address that the government just added. And frankly, I don't want to say anything more. I just think that this is very similar to what exists in some other jurisdictions. And again, it goes back to a degree of trust in the voter who has to swear to their address subject to penalties. If it turns out that an audit is done and it's found that they misswore an oath, they could be prosecuted. I'd be open to any amendments that would add anything along the lines of the person must be told that audits are done on these declarations and that they are subject, they do risk actually being prosecuted. I'll leave it at that. I'd like to move that.
So moved. NDP 28. Seeing no speakers, I'll recorded vote. Go.
Mr. Scott?
Yes.
Mr. Christopherson?
Oui.
Madame La Tendresse?
Oui.
Mr. Sims?
Yes.
Mr. Okiski?
No.
Mr. Wallace?
No.
Mr. Opitz?
No.
Mr. Reid?
No.
Mr. Richards?
No.
Defeated.
Really? It has a line from it. Yeah, all right. NDP 29.
Please move this, Mr. Chair, and ask for it to be voted on. This is another method of returning the VIC, and given that we know what the outcome is, we've had strong debate on that. I don't see any further point, other than I'd like the formal vote on it, please. Recorded vote.
Seeing no other speakers, a recorded vote on NDP 29, please.
Mr. Scott?
Yes.
Mr. Christopherson?
Yes.
Madame La Tendresse?
Oui.
Mr. Sims?
Yes.
Mr. Lukiski?
No.
Mr. Wallace?
No.
Mr. Opitz?
No.
Mr. Reid?
No.
Mr. Richards?
No.
Defeated.
Okay, that is defeated. And then, so are we going to that?
Yep.
Okay. Liberal 17, Mr. Sims.
Yeah, Liberal 17 does has the same thrust, obviously, to restore what I feel is a fundamental piece of identification that has been used for well on 50 years. I didn't speak on the NDP amendments earlier because I want to speak on my own here, which we're trying to do. And honestly, I feel that, as I've said before, the voter information card, and I think it bears repeating, that it is such a dependable piece that I'm willing to bet when the government says that the vast majority of people out there have no problems with what they perceive to be going on, but identification of a particular person to vouch for that person's ID. They want people to show ID. A lot of people out there I don't think are aware exactly what is being proposed here. What bothers me is that the end goal seems to be to get people in mind that they do not want to see at the polls and reverse engineer back to how they're going to set up legislation to do this in a very subtle way. And I do believe that this will come home to roost when you see voting day and when people show up en masse with their voter information cards, using it as ID and being told they can't. As I've said earlier, I considered proposing an amendment so that on the voter information card, it has to contain the phrase, "This piece of paper will not allow you to vote at the polls." You cannot use this as a valid piece of ID in bold letters, en anglais et en français aussi. I didn't do that. I didn't propose it because earlier I said we're being far too prescriptive when it comes to allowing Elections Canada to do their job. So I say this here in committee so that Elections Canada will take this advice and do that. And I think the government would agree with me. They're going to have to do this because it is such a vital piece. You go to a senior's residence, you go to a senior's home, you will see it taped to their fridge, taped on the table. During a writ period, that VIC is a prominent piece of mail that they put because they know that they've been using it for over 50 years to walk in there and say, this is what is my direct connection. This is my ticket. It's like you can't get on the plane without a boarding pass. You cannot vote without this VIC. And they can pretend that that's not going to take place. But this is why I asked Mr. Richards earlier about the fact that when you do your advertising, you have to state unequivocally that you cannot use this. And here's why. In a riding like mine, I have 193 communities, over 200 polling stations. If you look at a map, it's just a massive spread shot of polling divisions across 30,000 square kilometers. When somebody returns home from work, a lot of people commute to work half hour like that, that sort of thing. And I'm not just saying my riding is exclusive to this. Everybody has long commutes. A lot of people do. But when they come home from work, they go to the polling division, their community does not have a polling division, so their polling division is 20 kilometers down the road. That would affect, I would say, I don't know exactly, but I'm looking at somewhere between 30 and 40 communities that do not have that polling division in their community. They're going to return after work or wherever they come from, perhaps they're visiting someone, they're going to go to a polling division, they're going to have their VIC, which they picked up in the mail, they are going to try to use it, be told not, they cannot, they have to prove the residence, and many people realize that that doesn't suffice, so now they got to go back home, find a utility bill, and then all of a sudden they return and they say to themselves they can't vote now, they're not coming back. They're just not going to do it. Many people have a post office box. There's been some contention as to whether that is going to allow them to vote or not. But no matter, if somebody can prove that only having a post office box will still allow you to vote, there's always that hesitation from the people working in the polls. That hesitation is going to cause them to go away and not come back. We have seen it. We all have anecdotal evidence, most of which is true. We all know this to be, but to the people in the government who keep saying that this is not a big deal, they must agree with me that when they campaign and they go door to door, and inside that door, that voter information card is handy. Even the member from Mississauga-Streetsville said he witnessed many of them.
Where is he, by the way?
I'm assuming that part is correct. He did see a lot of those VICs. But make no mistake that this is going to be a problem realized on that day. I suspect that after the next election day, whoever the government is going to have to reverse engineer this back to get the VICs back into the business of being a part of the democratic exercise. It is, as my colleague points out, it is something that is updated even better than driver's licenses. Federal ID that has an address on it. I don't want to overstate it, and perhaps it's a little late, maybe I have. But I like to think, and it's late, and pardon me, Chair, if this being repetitive, but this is a fundamental piece of information that puts us towards democracy, that people fought and died for. And don't accuse me of being overdramatic on this, because that VIC is a prominent piece. And I can tell you, when I tell people and they say, well, there's nothing wrong with, you must prove that who you are in order to vote. If I said, you know that card that you use? I use it all the time. You can't use it anymore. Why would that be? Well, they're bewildered. Because it is such a fundamental part. Which leads us to think, why do they feel that this, if they feel it's such a detriment, if there's so much fraud / irregularities have been taking place with this VIC, why would they just get rid of it? Did they not explore the idea why? All we get is one example of a television program in Quebec that did something here. As my colleague also pointed out, think about what you have to go through to take the VIC and use that second piece of ID to produce some fake ID with a signature. I mean, is it really worth that? I mean, if you're going to do that, you might as well do something ludicrous like call some random person and tell them that their voting booth has changed location.
Who would do that?
Who would do that?
Who would do that? Who'd be so undemocratic?
I honestly believe that sorry, Mr. Wallace, if my speech interrupts your heckling, I apologize.
But blamed him for interrupting.
But I will say,
he interrupted you, Mr. Sims. You should be asking him not to be heckling while you're speaking.
I don't understand what evidence was handed to them that showed them that the only way around this situation was to eliminate that vital piece, that vital card that linked one individual and their right enshrined under Section 3 of the Charter to vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. On Liberal 17, which will of course also cover PV 28. Yes. All in favor? Okay. Hey, folks, when I get halfway into the vote, you probably are too late to do it, but I'll be nice. Go.
Mr. Sims.
Yes, and thank you, Chair.
You're very welcome.
Mr. Scott.
Yes.
Mr. Christopherson.
Yes.
Madame La Tendresse.
Oui.
Mr. Lukiski.
No. Give me that.
Mr. Wallace.
What's that? Are we actually voting now? Has he voted yet? I know we're voting no, but has he voted?
Yes.
Oh, he did vote. Because I couldn't tell with his, whether he voted or not.
Yeah, he did.
He did vote.
He's
on
asking
his
you
own
now.
amendment. Very nice. I'm voting no to his amendment, by the way.
Mr.
No, I
Opitz.
was paying attention. Mr. Sims wasn't.
Mr. Reid.
No.
Mr. Richards.
No.
Defeated.
It's defeated. We move on to,
This one was defeated already by G5.
right, so, sorry, that one goes over there someplace. NDP 30 went away. I think PV 29 went away.
Yep. NDP 30.
NDP 31 and NDP 32.
And then we're on 33.
Now we're on NDP 33. Mr. Scott?
Okay. Double checking, I've got the lines, yes. NDP 33, I would like to move, would delete lines 35 to 37, which is the new section 143 sub 3.3. So the new provision in C23 reads, this is not the amendment, this is what we're wanting to deal with. It reads, a candidate or the representative may examine but not handle any piece of identification presented under this section. Now, a candidate or the representative is effectively shorthand for scrutineers, and very rare you're going to have candidate bouncing around at every polling station, so it's a representative. And what this authorizes is those who are not actually the desk officers, but the people sort of making sure the process for your party's sake, your candidate's sake is working well, can simply say, could I see that piece of ID? Examine but not handle. So I'm not going to say it's a matter of handling, it's just somebody has to hold it up to them and they can see it. The Chief Electoral Officer brought our attention to this, and it was part of his amendments. And he suggested that this be deleted, so this is what this amendment does do. It would delete the lines, and therefore this new provision wouldn't exist. Let me give you, I won't give you the number of reasons, just in case I forget what number I gave, but one reason this is a problem is privacy. Average voters, there are pieces of ID on the lists and on maybe expanded lists that might have information that a person is content that an official person at the table could look at, but not a random person. Secondly, it has the potential, and this was actually the Chief Electoral Officer's point, to produce the perception or the feeling on the part of the voter of harassment. It doesn't actually have to be harassment for that to occur and for that to produce some kind of a disincentive or to voting the next time, but also just an unpleasant experience during voting, which has to be avoided at all costs. Third thing is could actually be harassment or intimidation, but let's just say that's unlikely by and large. Don't assume that average scrutineers are going to act any more dishonorably than the average voter. We don't believe the average voter is inclined to commit fraud. I don't believe the average scrutineer would intentionally harass or intimidate, but that would be perhaps the result and the feeling. And the last thing is tied to these lineups. Really, the idea that you have an enthusiastic scrutineer does not have to have any bad faith, or simply a scrutineer under instructions to carefully check ID. This could be something that produces lineups, it produces frustration, it could even produce people towards the end of the lines deciding, I'm not waiting anymore. Canadians, by the way, however much we are maybe one people that lines up better than others, we're not exactly patient when it comes to this kind of thing, and people are used to fairly quick voting in this country. This could contribute to a very different experience. There are reports south of the border of the use of asking for ID as a way to create lineups.
Yep.
I would hope we wouldn't get into that kind of scenario, but it's possible. So I would end by saying, Mr. Chair, I move to delete this new examination of identification documents provision and leave it in your capable hands.
Thank you. Madame La Tendresse.
Je vais être très brève. Je veux simplement...
I'll be very quick. I just want to add something. One of the reasons this amendment is important is because among the list of pieces of identification, there are credit card or bank slips or statements. I can imagine the situation without the consent of the voter. You know, they end up with your credit card slip. Any of the polling representatives who ask for ID might end up with it in their hands, and I don't think that's very good when it comes to the privacy of these individuals. And I really don't think that the clause should be there, so I think it should be deleted. I'll support the amendment.
Call the question on NDP 33.
With a vote would be a recorded vote, please.
Recorded vote.
Mr. Scott?
Yes.
Mr. Christopherson?
Oui.
Madame La Tendresse?
Oui.
Mr. Sims?
Yep. Your gem. Yep.
Thank you.
Mr. Lukowski?
No.
Mr. Wallace?
No.
Mr. Opitz?
No.
Mr. Reid?
No.
Mr. Richards?
No.
Defeated.
It's defeated. We now go to Liberal 19, and it has some conflicts with PV 30. They're all about the same issue, but written different ways. Mr. Sims?
They're the same.
Hmm?
They're the same.
Yeah, they're the same.
Yeah. Yeah. Linking, yeah.
It's yours. Go. Liberal 19.
Did he say they were linked or no?
Yes, linked with PV 30.
Okay, all right.
So whatever happens on this will happen on it.
Yeah, I got it.
Do a good job.
Oh, I am? You want to talk too? I'll share my time. How's
My
that?
amendment's riding on you like
No,
Yeah.
no.
If you don't start talking soon, I'm going to Mr.
I understand, yeah. An elector has every right to deny authorization to a candidate's representative to examine their ID. In this particular case, I think it's fundamental in what we're hoping to do here. I think that all that we've talked about thus far, up until this point, leads me to believe that that everything that we want to do when it comes to allowing the individual to vote has been absolutely suppressed. I'm sorry if I use that word again, but actually this is the first time I've used that word this evening, quite frankly. But that's what it's coming down to. And maybe it's a point of order, but not once yet have I seen any accommodation for anything that we've tried to earnestly put forward as a decent amendment or a decent way of looking at something that we feel is logistical. And we keep doing this end run around each and every provision. So, and this is one of those things. So I hope that they will consider this as being a legitimate way to restore some faith back into a system that's going to be severely damaged after this vote takes place. Perhaps Ms. May would like to add something?
Quickly.
Very quickly, just to say that the fundamental point is expressed by the Chief Electoral Officer is that no voter should be denied the right to vote because they did not feel comfortable having their private information reviewed by a candidate or candidate's representative. So my amendment is to the same effect as the Liberal amendment to ensure that that does not present a barrier to voting.
Thank you. Liberal 19, PV 30 connected. Those, we're going to call the vote now.
Yes, recorded, yes.
Okay, with a recorded vote? Nope.
Mr. Sims?
Yes.
Mr. Christopherson?
Wait.
Mr. Scott?
Yes.
Madame La Tendresse?
Oui.
Mr. Lukowski?
No.
Mr. Wallace?
No.
Mr. Opitz?
No.
Mr. Reid?
No.
Mr. Richards?
No.
Defeated.
Defeated. On to NDP 34.
Okay, so very quickly, this is an insertion after the clause that we just failed to have deleted, and it again follows the recommendation of the Chief Electoral Officer where he said if this provision allowing the candidate or the representative to scrutinize a piece of identification is kept, there needs to be some safeguard in the form of what I'm about to read. And I am moving this, so I don't know if I said that. When a candidate or their representative wishes to examine a piece of identification, the deputy returning officer shall advise the voter that they are not required to present it, and that any refusal by the voter shall not affect their right to vote. And this is taken directly from the recommendation of the CEO. I don't have to emphasize why this is there as a safeguard now that we failed to get rid of the provision. And I'd like to call a vote.
Great.
Except that you can call it.
Mr. Reid?
Yeah, the secret ballot is the right to vote and not have anyone know who you voted for. The idea that you have the right to come in and not show who you are just seems preposterous to me. I'm not sure if the fear is that the scrutineers are going to become stalkers or what the objection is, but the idea that when you participate in something, public duty, that you can say, no, I insist on maintaining my anonymity. The whole point of asking to examine the idea is to see whether there is some problem with it. So what can I say? I oppose this amendment.
Madame La Tendresse?
I just want to make sure that I understand your point, Mr. Reid. What you're telling me is that if someone goes and votes and uses his credit card statement and he's not comfortable showing someone that, anybody, if he says, no, I don't want to show my credit card statement, does that mean that that person won't be entitled to vote if he refuses?
Here is that the identification is it's a public document. It's if I understand correctly, you're saying what about a credit card? A credit card's not one of the documents that's used here. But look, you're willing to present it to somebody. You have to be willing to present it to somebody. We're saying, you're saying, or Mr. Scott is saying, well, only certain people in this poll can see it. And I think the whole point of having the scrutineers there is to allow them to make sure that everything's being conducted on the up and up. Am I missing something?
You still have the floor, Madame La Tendresse.
No, sorry.
Done? Call the question on NDP 34.
Mr. Scott?
Yes.
Mr. Christopherson?
Yes.
Madame La Tendresse?
Yes.
Mr. Sims?
Yes.
Mr. Lukiski? Mr. Wallace? Mr. Opitz? Mr. Reid?
No.
Mr. Richards?
No.
Defeated.
It's defeated. I guess they're not exactly the same. Liberal 20. But it is identical to PV 31. Right? They're the same. Okay. Madam,
I'm just conferring.
Ms. May, would you like to lead this one? Very short.
I think she should.
Are we on PV 31?
We are, which matches Liberal 20. So a vote on one will be for either or all.
Thank you very much. This amendment is to stipulate, and it's very similar to the last one, that no elector should be prevented from voting based on their reluctance or refusal to have their ID shown, not to any of the actual poll workers, but again to the candidate or candidate's representative. So it's a privacy issue, and we want to make sure people can vote, and it's based on a recommendation from the Chief Electoral Officer.
Thank you. On those, PV 31 and Liberal 20. Yeah. All in favor? A recorded vote. Thank you. All right.
Mr. Sims?
Yes.
Mr. Scott?
Yes.
Mr. Christopherson?
Oui.
Madame La Tendresse?
Oui.
Mr. Lukiski?
No.
Mr. Wallace?
No.
Mr. Opitz? Mr. Reed?
No.
Mr. Richards?
No.
Defeated.
Right. Okay, we're now into clause 48 as amended. Certainly.
Mr. Lukiski?
Yes.
Mr. Wallace?
Oui.
Mr. Opitz?
Yes.
Mr. Reed? Mr. Richards?
Yes.
Mr. Scott?
No.
Mr. Christopherson?
No.
Madame La Tendresse?
No.
Mr. Sims?
No.
Carried.
Carried. All right, we go to G6, and most of this was talked out when we're on G5. G6.
G6 is Article 49.
Government. Yeah, that's where we are.
Yeah.
Just that I just have a brief amendment for 49.1. So after
When this passes or doesn't, or whichever it does.
I think it will.
See how well the chair did that?
I'll wager with you on this.
All right. Mr. Lukiski, on G6, we covered this. But
Yes, we have, and so I won't spend much time. I do move it, and it's basically saying that anyone who cannot produce identification to prove residence and wants to take an oath, and the attester who also co-signs that oath on the residency question, both be informed by election and poll workers as to the penalties that could be imposed in case these people are trying to falsify information or lie. They're just giving them the information up front, saying here's what will happen if you're trying to screw around. Thank you.
On G6, calling the question. It will pass then? Yes? Okay. Mr. Scott, you have something to fit in here, do you? Is that the next piece?
Oh, do we have to actually vote for Clause 49 first?
49 first.
Okay, we'll vote for Clause 49 first. All in favor of Clause 49? On division, fine.
To move the following amendment that I've written out, that Bill C-23 be amended by adding on page 26 after line 1, quote, 49.1, meaning a new clause. Thank you. The Chief Electoral Officer, the following section is added, and then section 143.1, which has just been repealed, so it's available as a number. The following section is added, section 143.1. The Chief Electoral Officer shall ensure that the notice of confirmation of registration that is sent under section 95 or 102 is marked with a prominent message informing the elector that this notice of confirmation of registration may not be used as a piece of identification for purposes of voting. And I think I have found an amendment that the government will vote for. Thank you.
We can only dream.
You're right.
So, on the amendment. Sorry, go ahead.
It's a long speech or a short speech, depending on the government answer. If they're going to vote for this, I could save them a lot of pain.
Yeah, I was just going to say, can you please read it into the record again, quick?
Okay.
The Bill C-23 be amended by adding on page 26 after line 1 the following. 49.1 becomes the new clause. Section 143.1 becomes the new section. The Chief Electoral Officer shall ensure that the notice of confirmation of registration that is sent under section 95 or 102, the VIC, is marked with a prominent message informing the elector that this notice of confirmation of registration may not be used as a piece of identification for purposes of voting.
Mr. Reid? Thank you, Mr. Chair, I can't help but notice that it is 3 minutes to our proposed closing time. May I suggest, given this is a new subject, one for which we don't have the text, and that there might be time to deal with this in the interim between now and the next meeting, or the next iteration of this meeting, that we suspend at this point and come back tomorrow, and this be our first order of business?
Well, there's been discussion of another first order of business, but I'm okay if you want to talk about it overnight on this one. We're going to stop someplace.
I guess all I would say is the first order of business I prefer being the one that we discussed. And then
Right.
then we will
So this would be the first amendment that we get to.
Sorry, that's what I should have said.
That's there. So I'll go along with that. I thank you all for your cooperation tonight. Many issues were done. Many brain cells were killed. We are adjourned.